Chapter 185. My apologies, the reason why I updated so late was because I made a mistake that made me want to vomit blood. The steps to update the system are: first, upload the chapter. Second, enter another link and click on Publish. I finished writing the chapter at 8 this evening, but my mind was muddled today. The first step was to upload the chapter. However, when the second step required me to publish the chapter, I did not forget to publish it. Because I had made this mistake before, I remembered to publish it, but in the end, my mind was muddled and I did not click on Publish. Instead, I clicked on Unban. In the end, the chapter 1 wrote was only uploaded to the system. Before it could be published, I unbanned it myself. The problem was that I did not realize my mistake and went offline in a daze, causing everyone to wait for a long time. Just now, a friend called me and asked me why I did not update today. I immediately went online to check and found this mistake. It really made me speechless. My apologies for making everyone wait for so long. The 174th chapter, Garant's Business Group. Returning to Wildfire Town, Sheya's return this time could be considered as a true return to his hometown in glory. Back then, the one who left this place was a penniless wild boy with a rusty woodcutting axe in his hand. But now, Sheya was wearing luxurious clothes, high-quality deerskin boots, and riding a first-class military horse. He had become a young noble of the Byzantine Empire, a tyrant who commanded the military affairs of a county. Sheya found an inn in Wildfire Town to stay in. The first thing he did was to ask the inn servants to fetch a few buckets of water and let Sky Attack have a good bath. Otherwise, his body's fishy smell could make people fall over from a few steps away. Even Sheya couldn't stand it. After eating and drinking, Sky Attack changed into a new set of clothes that Sheya had given him. Although the Goblin Lord was ugly, after resting enough, his eyes regained some luster. He finally regained some of the valiant demeanor that he had when Sheya first met him, when he dared to go against Hastings. However, once Sky Attack regained his vigor, he grabbed onto Sheya and pestered him. In the end, he wanted Sheya to bring him to Oaks. Speaking of Oaks, Sheya felt a little guilty. After he left home last time, he had coincidentally joined the Rhodian Cavalry Regiment. After that, he had experienced a war between the Odin and the Byzantium and accumulated military merit. He had been like a fish in water in the Byzantine Empire's army. Later on, by chance, he had become a noble baron and a high-ranking official in the Byzantium. Although he did not have much of a sense of belonging to the Byzantium before, his mentality had changed greatly now. He more or less had a good impression of it. Seeing that he was becoming more and more successful in the Byzantium's official system, he gradually made up his mind to continue living in the Byzantine Empire. As for Oaks, the poor Goblin Queen had been left to raise horses in his home in the mountains. It had been almost a year since Sheya had left home. Most of the time, he had almost forgotten about the goblin servant that he had left behind to look after his home. Furthermore, with the goblin's uncertain loyalty to him, Oaks might have already run away when he had left home for half a year. If he returned now, he would most likely be left with an empty and broken house. Sheya had no choice but to agree to Sky Attack's request. However, he still added, "I'm only responsible for bringing you to Oaks. If he doesn't want to go with you, you can't force him. No matter what, he's my servant now. If you dare to force him, I won't agree." Sky Attack stared at Sheya with his beady eyes. "Servant? No. Oak's wife, he's mine." Sheya only smiled and didn't say anything. Sky Attack stared at him for a while. In the end, he knew that he had no other choice. He could only sigh and frown. "Saw, your ransom, I'll pay." "Ransom, saw, exchange, Oaks. You want to redeem yourself?" Sheya smiled. He thought that if you could afford it, Lao Tzu wouldn't mind using Oaks, a goblin that only knew how to eat and not work, to return him to you. However, He was afraid that Oaks wouldn't be willing. After all, he had been with me for a while. Lao Tzu was too embarrassed to throw him out and sell him. Gold. A lot. Gold. Exchange. Wife. Seeing that Shea only smiled weirdly and didn't say anything, Sky Attack gritted his teeth. Gold a lot. Shea looked at the Goblin Lord and sneered. Do you think that I don't understand you goblins? You goblins are as poor as beggars. Even if you are the leader of a tribe, you can't have much wealth. Gold? I don't believe it. Sky Attack was anxious. Gold, I have it. Forest. Jack. When he mentioned Jack, not only Shea, but even Todoro's eyes lit up. Jack people. Shea pondered for a moment. I heard that Jack people occupied some gold mine, but how did you get their gold? Sky Attack was anxious and sweating profusely. His human language wasn't very good. He used his hands and feet to gesture for a long time before he said something. It turned out that Sky Attack was a famous goblin lord in the Red Wilderness. Because of his bravery, his tribe could be called one of the most powerful tribes in the Red Wilderness. The goblin race had no unity. Even the goblins in the tribe only had respect for the Lord, and there was not much loyalty to speak of. A large tribe naturally needed to feed a large population. If the Lord couldn't lead everyone to survive, then the goblins might rebel. No matter if it was Sky Attack or Goblin Attack, no matter if it was a lord or a leader, they would cook and eat you first. Goblins, on the other hand, had low IQ and were like a sheet of loose sand. For many years, they didn't have any management skills. Whenever a tribe grew strong, it would often be because the land in the Red Wilderness was barren. Once the tribe grew, it would be unable to feed the goblins in the tribe. In the end, there would be internal strife. Therefore, there would never be a true goblin king in the Red Wilderness. Once the tribe grew strong, it would eventually collapse due to internal strife. The goblins' disunity was one reason. Another reason was that the goblins had low intelligence and didn't know how to manage. However, Sky Attack's tribe was different. He was known as the #1 warrior among the goblins because of his bravery. Everyone in the tribe respected and submitted to him. Another reason was that his tribe was able to solve the food problem. His tribe was located in the northwest area of the Red Wilderness. It occupied a relatively rich riverbank area. At the same time, it also had a forest. The most amazing thing was this forest. Although the forest wasn't big, it had a natural spring. The spring water flowed all year round. Even in the cold winter, it didn't freeze or dry up. Unfortunately, the spring itself was of no use to the goblins. The spring water was bitter and unpalatable. It must have come from some underground water. Who knew what mineral composition was in the water? It was so bitter that not only the goblins themselves, but even the cattle and sheep they caught would not drink a single mouthful of it. Everything in the world had its wonders. The spring water was in the middle of the forest. The bitter spring water couldn't be drunk, but it nourished the surrounding soil and gave birth to a plant that couldn't be found anywhere else. According to Sky Attack, there was a circle of strange trees near the center of the spring in the forest he owned. The trees must have grown because they were full of the strange spring water. The wood was extremely hard, comparable to metal. In the summer, palm-sized leaves would hang on the branches. It was said that even the leaves were abnormally hard. In Sky Attack's tribe, some goblins came up with an idea. They collected these strange and hard leaves. After drying them in the sun, a few leaves stacked on top of each other. The hardness of the leaves was almost comparable to that of ordinary iron armor leaves. It was also light and portable, suitable for short and fragile creatures like the goblins. Using these strange iron tree leaves to make armor and sharpening the branches of the iron tree to make spears, this was the regular equipment of the goblin soldiers in Sky Attack's tribe. What was even more amazing was that the iron tree that grew around the bitter spring water would grow a large number of strange mushrooms every year. These mushrooms were strangely fragrant, but they couldn't be eaten. If a goblin dared to take a bite, he would be poisoned to death in less than a night. But it was these poisonous mushrooms that made Skyatak's tribe rich. According to Skyatak, since his father's generation, his tribe had been trading with the Zaku tribe in the far west of the Red Wilderness. Although the goblins weren't friendly with humans, they still had some friendship with their neighbors, the Zaku tribe, who lived on the Wildfire Plain. Every few months, the Zaku tribe would send people to Skyatak's tribe to buy the poisonous mushrooms. These poisonous mushrooms were useless to the goblins, but the Zaku tribe regarded them as treasures. Not only did they have a lot of demand, but they were also very polite every time they came to buy. Skyatak's tribe, since his father's generation, had been relying on these poisonous mushrooms growing around the bitter spring water to earn benefits from the Zaku tribe. Every time they traded, they could get a lot of food and livestock sent by the Zaku tribe, and even gold. Although the Zaku tribe had a gold mine, gold was a rare metal, and it had no practical use. Unless it was used as currency in the civilized world, it would have real value in circulation. But think about it, why would a native tribe living in the remote mountains and forests need so much gold? Occasionally, some human merchant groups would go into the mountains to trade with the Zaku tribe and take away some gold. But usually, with so much gold, the natives just piled it up at home as decoration. It was even said that even the children of the Zaku tribe could wear gold at will. In that place, gold was the least valuable thing. After hearing this, Shea's eyes suddenly lit up. Todoro and Philip's expressions also changed. Only Sharba stuffed meat into his mouth. Gold. Gold. Shea's biggest problem now was money. He had become a noble, but according to Uria's calculations, he couldn't support a large family. Moreover, to reorganize the military affairs of Moore County, he needed a large amount of military funds. Where would the money come from? It would be faster to shake his head if he counted on the local finance and taxes. If he could get the Zaku tribe's gold, then good. I'll make a deal with you. Shea's eyes turned. Don't you want the oaks? I don't want your ransom. Lao Tzu also doesn't care about your gnome tribe's scrap metal. I want that wood of yours. This year's production of those spring eye poisonous mushrooms, I want them all. Skyatak was stunned when he heard this. Although he was infatuated, he was still an overlord. He hesitated. Mushrooms, in exchange for food, I'll give it to you. No. Ha! Shea laughed. You want to use mushrooms to exchange for food and supplies from the Zaku tribe? No need. Your tribe needs food, Lao Tzu will give it to you. Food. F***ck. Lao Tzu's Moore County was an important food-producing area in the northern part of the empire. He didn't have anything else, but he had a warehouse full of food. Shea was afraid that the gnome would still hesitate. He fiercely said, Food and other necessities, I'll give them all to you. How many gnomes are there in your tribe? 10,000. Skyatak reported a number that shocked Shea. 10,000. Based on Shea's understanding of the gnomes in the Red Wilderness, a tribe with over 1,000 people was considered a very large tribe. This Skyatak's tribe actually had over 10,000 gnomes. Shea did a quick calculation. The gnomes were short and didn't consume much food. Moreover, among the 10,000 gnomes, other than the young and strong, the old, weak, women, and children didn't eat and drink much. Based on this calculation, the average gnome would consume at most 1 gene of food per day. That's 10,000 gene of food per day. That's only 4 or 5 tons. I'll give you 300 tons. Even if your clansmen are idle all day and don't hunt or work, eating, drinking, and playing every day is enough to last you for 2 to 3 months. Shea sneered. Your tribe is so big you can't rely on the Zaku tribe to survive. When Skyatak heard this, his eyes immediately turned red. He didn't know how to calculate 300 tons, but he was very clear that the smartest elder in the tribe had told him the number of transactions. Every time he traded with the Zaku tribe, The food he obtained would only be enough for the entire tribe to eat for a month. The gnomes' biggest source of food usually depended on themselves. The Zaku tribe's trade could only be considered as an additional income. Shea doubled the value of the transaction as soon as he opened his mouth. Why wouldn't he do this kind of business? However, Shea wasn't a fool. No one on the Wildfire Plains would believe the gnomes' credibility. These green-skinned gnomes were despicable and shameless. They would turn around and deny what they had said. Shea carefully asked a few more questions, and then said with a smile, "Counting the days, it's almost time for the mushrooms to grow and mature. I'll take some people and go back to your tribe first, and collect all the mushrooms and transport them away. In the future, when the Zaku tribe comes to buy mushrooms, let them come to me." Sky Attack's mind was muddled. He only felt that he had taken a big advantage and immediately agreed without hesitation. He would use these mushrooms to sell to the Zaku tribe in exchange for gold. Well, maybe even the magic Kistaro. This business was worth doing. Shea was an impatient person. Since he had made up his mind, he would immediately do it. But then there was a problem. He heard that the production of those mushrooms wasn't small. Sky Attack, this honest gnome, felt that he had taken advantage of this transaction. He took the initiative to tell Shea that he had saved a lot of gold in his tribe. He might as well give it all to Shea as a ransom for Oaks. How could Shea not accept gold that was delivered to his doorstep? As for Oak's will, it wasn't important now. Shea was now extremely worried about money. If that little gnome servant didn't agree, the country bumpkin would directly tie him up and give him to Sky Attack. We can't go to Sky Attack's tribe to move things with just the few of us. We have to move so many mushrooms, not just 1 or 2 baskets. I heard that there are several carts of mushrooms. There's also that gold. I heard that those iron trees are also good. Bring a few over for us to take a look. Maybe they'll be useful. After all, Philip had been the leader of a warrior group. He had the clearest mind when it came to planning. After some calculations, he said, the 4 of us aren't enough. We have to bring people to Sky Attack's tribe. A caravan is necessary. Summon people. Shea smiled. This is Wildfire Town. Although very few humans dare to enter the territory of the gnomes, as long as there are enough benefits in Wildfire Town, there are many who dare to take risk. I know this all too well. Also, it's important to buy some food locally, Philip said in a low voice. Gnomes are cunning and greedy by nature. They are also timid and cowardly. There's no proof of a deal. If we go there and try to take away those mushrooms with just a few words, I'm afraid that the gnomes won't agree. Even if this Sky Attack is the leader of the tribe. I heard that he's been out for a few months. If a lord isn't in the tribe for a few months, that tribe might not even be his anymore. When he said the last few words, Philip felt the pain. He was a proper leader of a group who had been usurped from his position by his subordinate. Putting himself in their shoes, no matter how much prestige Sky Attack had in the tribe in the past, he hadn't returned for a few months. Those cunning and greedy gnomes might have already elected a new leader. Even if Sky Attack was still the lord, the gnomes might not agree if a lord's words cut off a deal in the tribe. This time, they couldn't just go with a few people. They had to bring a batch of food. The gnomes would only agree to the deal when they saw the real thing. It's settled then. We'll buy food locally and then assemble a caravan. In Wildfire Town, there are plenty of people who dare to take risks. After they finished resting, they immediately went out to work. Philip and Sharbo went to buy food locally. The food for the gnomes didn't need to be too good, just the lowest grade of coarse grain would do. The price of this kind of grain was about 1 copper coin for half a kilogram. Buying 10,000 kilograms would only cost 10 gold coins. 100 copper coins equals 1 silver coin, 10 silver coins equals 1 gold coin. Although they didn't have much money on them, they could still fork out 200 or 300 gold coins after pooling together. Anyway, they weren't buying a few hundred tons at once. It was just enough for a caravan of food to transport over. Once the gnomes saw the real thing and Sky Attack's prestige, there shouldn't be a problem. What if the gnomes went back on their word and wanted to take advantage of them? With Shea and the others' abilities, would they be afraid of this? On the other hand, Shea brought Todoro and Sky Attack. The three of them went straight to the Black Street as soon as they went out. It wasn't the first time Shea had come to the Black Street. After the war, the Black Street seemed to be more prosperous than before. After the war, a large number of business opportunities flooded in. All kinds of demands within the Byzantine Empire were suspended with the war. With the end of the war, the domestic demand for all kinds of strange goods produced on the Wildfire Plains exploded. The Black Street of Wildfire Town ushered in a peak period of trade. As soon as they arrived at the Black Street, they immediately felt that it was extremely crowded. Shea used his tall and strong body to force his way through the crowd and came to the door of a shop on the street. He stood on the steps and roared. His voice was brimming with energy. With this roar, his voice instantly drowned out the surrounding clamor. Next, Theodore, who was beside him, unfurled a large flag that he had prepared beforehand and raised it up high with a stick. Shea's roar immediately attracted the attention of many passers-by on the Black Street. Many people saw that there was something to see and swarmed over, blocking the road for a moment. Recruiting! I'm recruiting! Come if you're not afraid of death and dare to risk your life. Riches and honor are found in danger. Men die with their heads facing the sky. If you have the guts, come and sign up. Follow me on an adventure and fight for your riches and honor. Shea's loud roar spread throughout the entire area. The surrounding people couldn't help but feel disappointed. They saw that Shea was wearing a warrior's short robe, exquisite soft leather armor, and was equipped with a weapon. It was obvious that he was a warrior. When they heard that he was recruiting, they assumed that it was another mercenary group recruiting here. This kind of thing was very common in Wildfire Town. It seemed that there wasn't much to see. Just as the crowd was about to disperse, Shea's next sentence immediately made everyone excited again. Follow me to the Red Wilderness. I'm only recruiting warriors. Men who dare to risk their lives with swords. 5 Byzantium gold coins each. 5 gold coins. Boom. The crowd was in an uproar. What kind of concept was 5 gold coins? With the current food prices, even if you ate meat for every meal, 5 gold coins was enough for an ordinary small family to eat and drink for a year. An experienced warrior in a mercenary group could only earn about that much after a year of hard work. And one could earn a year's worth of income just by making a trip to the Red Wilderness. Shea shouted. A moment later, the news spread throughout the entire Black Street, and a stream of people flocked towards him. Seeing that he had attracted enough attention, Shea slightly smiled, and then threw out specific conditions. Recruit 50 warriors, 5 gold coins for each person, and hire 50 carriages, including people and carriages, 1 gold coin for each carriage. Make a trip to the Red Wilderness. Cash out 30% before you set off, and cash out the rest when you come back. The crowd below was in an uproar. Wildfire Town was indeed a paradise for adventurers. Shea had just finished his roar when many warriors and mercenaries in the crowd responded loudly and squeezed their way up from the crowd. Shea faintly smiled and glanced back. Theodore, who was behind him, immediately understood and raised the flagpole in his hand higher. The large flag fluttered in the wind. It was the eagle-headed military flag of the Byzantine Empire. Lao Tzu is a member of the Byzantine Empire's Rhodian Cavalry Regiment. If you want to earn money, come and sign up. Lao Tzu will never shortchange anyone. The Byzantine Empire had just set up camp in Wildfire Town. Although their reputation wasn't good, the Rhodian Cavalry Regiment had a great reputation. The moment this name was announced, everyone present was stunned. Seeing the people signing up below, Shea jumped down from the stairs and shouted, "There are too many people here. If you want to sign up, go find me at XX Inn on XX Street." Lao Tzu is the personal guard of the Rhodian Cavalry Regiment's General Roar. His name is Shea. Go to the inn to sign up and take the martial arts test on the spot. Someone in the crowd immediately shouted, "Ah! It's that kid Shea." Lao Tzu recognizes him. This kid actually became a member of the Rhodian Cavalry Regiment. Yes, in the early years, he often came to my shop to sell firewood. Aha! Yes, it's that kid. He even bought wine from my inn on credit. Many of the Wildfire Town elders in the crowd recognized Shea. This made the onlookers believe in Shea's words even more. Shea saw that the time was right. He had Todoro put away the flag and was about to leave. Just as he walked down the stairs, a waiter ran out from the shop behind him and courteously chased after him. He bowed to Shea and said with a smile, "General, our shop's owner has something to discuss." "HM?" Shea turned around and saw the waiter in linen clothes smiling courteously. However, there was no fear in his eyes. The waiter smiled courteously. "Our shop's owner said that he has business to do with you." After he finished speaking, he pointed at the door of the shop behind him. Shea smiled and looked at the shop behind him. He suddenly thought of something and smiled. He nodded and said to Todoro, "Go back to the inn and meet up with them. I'll be back later." After he finished speaking, he followed the waiter into the shop with large strides. The shop's lobby was not spacious because Shea had blocked the entrance. There was no business inside and no one. The waiter led the way and led Shea through the shop to a clean room inside. The room was fully equipped with tables and chairs. Soon after, a loud laugh was heard. An old man in exquisite clothes walked in from the door. His face was full of wrinkles and his hair was combed very neatly. His eyes revealed a shrewd look, and he looked like a typical profiteer. After the old man came in, he looked at Shea with a smile in his eyes. "General Shea, long time no see. Speaking of which, you still owe me a lion cub." Shea laughed out loud, stood up, and politely saluted. It turned out that when he was recruiting people outside, he only cared about finding the most eye-catching place and didn't pay attention to where he was standing. He had just come down from the mountain for an adventure and came to Wildfire Town's Black Street to look for a living. He had accepted a job to hunt a lion cub. At that time, he had accepted the job from this shop and even signed a contract. However, he encountered a fortuitous encounter along the way. In the end, he ran to slaughter Dora, the unlucky dragon, and forgot about hunting a lion cub. Speaking of which, Shea had violated the contract between the two parties. However, his identity was different now, so the other party probably didn't come looking for trouble with him because of this. However, Shea still felt a little embarrassed. After carefully calculating, he was penniless back then. If it wasn't for the business he accepted from this shop and the money the other party gave him in advance, he probably wouldn't even have the money to buy weapons and eat. He would have starved to death before going out on an adventure. Speaking of which, he still owed the other party a favor. Moreover, he had taken the other party's advance money in the end, but he hadn't been able to fulfill his promise to hunt a lion cub. It could be said that he had gone back on his word. "It's only been half a year since we last met. I didn't expect General Shea to have already been promoted and become rich. When I first saw your appearance, I knew that you weren't an ordinary person. In just half a year, I didn't expect you to become the military chief of a county. You even made a great contribution in the war. It really makes one sigh with emotion." The old unscrupulous merchant's words immediately made Shea's heart tremble. Although the other party's words were polite, they directly exposed his identity. In order to gain the trust of the people outside, he had used the Rhodian Cavalry Regiment's banner. But now, this shop owner directly exposed his identity as the military chief of Moore County. "You know my identity." Shea frowned. This old and scrupulous merchant was afraid that he would arouse Shea's suspicions and hurriedly explained politely, Our shop belongs to the Gallons Chamber of Commerce. Our Chamber of Commerce's vice-chairman, Lord Gurode, is a good friend of yours. He once sent a letter saying that you will be coming to Moore County to take up your post in a few days. Moore County is so close to Wildfire Town. Vice-Chairman Gurode told us that if you have any needs here, we should do our best to cooperate with you. Of course, with you in charge of the military affairs of a county, there will definitely be great business opportunities. Lord Gurode's meaning is that if there are any good opportunities for cooperation that would benefit outsiders, it would be better to leave them to us. Hearing this, Shea's expression immediately calmed down and he laughed. I didn't know. So your shop also belongs to the Gallons Chamber of Commerce. Ah, Gurode, that fatso, became the vice-chairman? Shea didn't know that because Gurode had roped him in and invested in him, he had immediately received the Emperor's appreciation and become the military chief of the border. The upper echelons of the Lantis kingdom felt that Gurode's foresight was very good and had done a good job. Thus, they raised Gurode's position in the Lantis merchant group. The so-called Gallons merchant group was actually an intelligence organization that the Lantis kingdom had set up on the continent. After the old unscrupulous merchant invited Shea to sit down, he had someone bring over fine wine. The two of them exchanged pleasantries for a while before Shea lost his patience and asked directly, "Why did you ask me to come in?" "Let me say this first, I don't have any lion cubs right now. At worst, I'll just return the money you gave me back then 100 times over." The old unscrupulous merchant laughed. "I wouldn't dare to mention such a small matter in front of Baron Shea. I asked you to come in because of another matter." Pausing for a moment, the old unscrupulous merchant stroked his beard and laughed. "I heard that you were recruiting people outside. We don't do business with mercenaries and warriors. However, if you want carriages and horses, our humble merchant group still has some ability. It's better to do things with experience than to do things with experience. I don't know the background of those carriages and coachmen you recruited outside, so it's not convenient to use them. Our merchant group in Wildfire Town will lend you the carriages and horses we have in Wildfire Town." Shea laughed. "How can I accept that?" The old unscrupulous merchant shook his head and laughed. "This is Vice President Gurode's idea. If you have a need, we will naturally do our best to help. As for the price, your asking price is a bit too high. How about this? 50 carriages, horses, and manpower will be provided by us. As for the fee, 10 gold coins will be enough. Speaking of which, this price has already increased by several times. However, going to the territory of the goblins is considered a risk, so we will need to reward these people who are working hard for a living." Originally, the old unscrupulous merchant didn't want to take any money. However, as the leader of Lantis Intelligence Organization in Wildfire Town, he knew how to hide his intentions. If he didn't take any money, Shea might become suspicious instead. It was better to openly charge a high price. This way they would be on friendly terms, but they wouldn't appear overly enthusiastic. There was no reason for Shea to disagree. He immediately smiled and said, "That's for the best. It's easier for people who know the routes to use them." Seeing that Shea had agreed, the old unscrupulous merchant hesitated for a moment before adding, "It just so happens that our merchant group also has some goods to transport to the north. We also have to pass through the Red Wilderness. Why don't we just travel with your caravan? It'll be easier for us to look after each other. Our merchant group has a team of guards, more than 30 of them. They are all warriors with decent skills. They can look after each other along the way and ensure our safety." Shea's heart skipped a beat. This is giving me bodyguards for free. He couldn't help but raise his head and look deeply at the other party. The old unscrupulous merchant smiled. "Don't misunderstand. It's just on the way. We are actually taking advantage of a hero like you traveling with us." Although Shea faintly felt that this kind of good thing was a bit too much of a coincidence, when he thought about it carefully, there really wasn't any harm to him, so he agreed. After that, The old unscrupulous merchant said a few more polite words before sending Shea out. By the time Shea returned to the inn, there were already many mercenary groups that made a living in Wildfire Town who had come to apply. This was a place where trade was concentrated. All kinds of mercenary groups were present, but there were also good and bad ones mixed together. This time, Shea's price was really too high, so it immediately attracted all the local mercenary group. Among them, there were dragons and snakes mixed together, and there were also some small mercenary groups that didn't make the cut. The lobby of the inn was originally quite spacious, but when a group of valiant mercenaries squeezed in, the inn was immediately filled to the brim. Fortunately, this kind of thing was already common in Wildfire Town, so the owner of the inn wasn't surprised. It was just that with so many people, he couldn't help but be a little flustered. However, he secretly ordered the shop assistants to double the price of food and drink. Since these mercenary groups had come, it would be a waste to not make some money. He couldn't help but feel grateful to this customer, Shea. This kind of forthright customer, the more the better. Those mercenary groups that came to apply had to eat. Moreover, everyone was focused on snatching this big business. As for the doubling of the price of food in the shop, no one cared about such details. When Shea finally returned, a group of warriors immediately surrounded him. Seeing the large group of warriors rushing over, the crowd dispersed. Shea had just stepped 1 foot into the door when he was almost directly pushed out by the crowd. He could hear the clamoring of voices in his ears. "Sir, please hire us. Our XXX mercenary group is famous for our reputation. Our XXX mercenary group has traveled the Wildfire Plains for 3 years, and we have never failed. Bah! Don't listen to this trash's nonsense. Sir, please hire us. Our XXX mercenary group is famous for our fighting prowess. As long as we protect you, you don't need to kill on the way. As long as we hang our flag, those bandits won't dare to come close." "Nonsense. Sir, don't listen to this bastard. Last month, they were robbed and ran back with only a pair of pants. It's still our XXX mercenary group." Shea was dizzy from the noise. Finally, he couldn't hold back his temper and roared, "All of you, quiet down for Lao Tzu." With a push of his hands, a surge of brute force was exerted, directly pushing the 2 mercenary group warriors who claimed to be valiant and brave, out of the way. Shea struggled to squeeze into the shop and quickly ran to the stairs. He shouted at the chaotic crowd below, "Quiet! Quiet! All of you, quiet down for Lao Tzu. Speak one by one. Otherwise scram." What kind of King mercenary group was this? They were simply a group of beggars. In his heart, when he was young, he still had some romantic fantasies about adventuring as a mercenary career. At this moment, he couldn't help but feel slightly disappointed in his heart. These people were attacking each other. Where was the lofty and unyielding character of a mercenary warrior in his imagination? They were like a group of hungry dogs that saw a bone. Shea wiped his sweat and shouted, "Don't try to deceive Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu also grew up in Wildfire Town. I know very well how much you people are worth. Those who want to fish in troubled waters and don't have the ability to make a living, walk out of here yourselves. Don't wait for Lao Tzu to get angry and beat you up. I want people who are truly capable and who are willing to risk their lives." As soon as he said this, many of the mercenaries below immediately revealed guilty expressions. Speaking of which, although there were many mercenaries in Wildfire Town, there was no lack of people with weak strength who were just trying to make a living by cheating others. Since Shea said that he grew up in Wildfire Town, it seemed that he wasn't the kind of fat sheep that could be deceived. Many people couldn't help but feel disappointed. Shea pointed at the door. "You know very well how capable you are. This time, we are going to the Red Wilderness directly to the Gnome tribe. Think about the meaning of this for yourselves. Those who don't have the ability to make this money, walk out on your own. Don't trouble Lao Tzu. Go directly to the gnome tribe? These words made many people want to retreat. Originally, many of the troublemakers were just hoping to get lucky and followed the group to the Red Wilderness. Those goblins were weak and might not dare to rob the group. As long as nothing happened during this trip, they would be able to get their hands on the money with the help of the heavens. But going directly to the gnome tribe? What the hell? Those gnomes were so dangerous. They were a group of starving wild dogs that could eat people. After a while, the crowd surged. Many people lowered their heads and ran out. Almost half of the people below were gone. Shea carefully looked at the remaining people. There was still a group of people standing at the bottom of the stairs. With one look, he could tell that they were the real mercenaries who had been adventuring all year round. In addition, there were some people sitting in the lobby of the inn. There were 3 to 5 groups of people sitting at the tables near the walls. These people were clearly mercenaries, but they didn't rush up to fight for business. They were clearly some of the truly powerful mercenary group. They cared about their status and disdained to run over like hungry dogs fighting for food. However, these people sat far away with arrogance on their faces. Yet, they were separated from each other in groups. It was as if the well water did not interfere with the river water. The recommendation votes are too ugly. If everyone's monthly votes have been used up, can you please help vote some recommendation votes? To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 186. Gior Chapter 175 Secret. These people made Shea's eyes light up. He looked at the group of mercenaries below and said with a smile, I can't ask them one by one. Go to the innkeeper and register your name and residence. After I have selected you, I will naturally send someone to inform you. Only then did these people let go of Shea and went to pester the innkeeper. The innkeeper was also black-hearted. He sent a worker to the back to find a table, a chair, a pen and paper to register. The registration required 3 copper coins to make a fortune. Shea didn't pay attention to these and went straight to the middle of the lobby. He looked at the remaining mercenaries sitting there. Obviously, these people were the real elite. Shea smiled and pulled out a dagger and nailed it to a table. The dagger went straight into the table. He looked around and smiled. It seems that the people in this room are the ones with real ability. Well then, who should I give this business to? Let's talk first. Pausing, Shea raised his eyebrows. It's not easy to say on the street. This time, when I go to the Wildfire Plains, I will first go to the Red Wilderness. Then, I will go west and go to the Zakota people. So, those who are familiar with the terrain there will have priority. At this moment in the lobby, there was a table near the door, a table near the stairs, and a table to the left of Shea. Obviously, there were 3 different groups of people. After listening to Shea's words, the 3 groups looked at each other. Finally, a middle-aged warrior from the group sitting at the door stood up. This person was wearing leather armor. There was a long sword on the table. The sword's hilt was wrapped in a layer of linen. The cloth was clearly stained with blood over the years, giving off a red and green color. The middle-aged warrior stood up and looked at Shea. He then looked at the other 2 groups and smiled. Sir, although the price of your business is high enough, one business can't be done by 3 people. The decision of who to give it to is still in your hands. With that, he grabbed the sword and slashed at the table next to him. With a crack, the table was split in half by his sword, but it didn't move at all. It wasn't until the middle-aged warrior walked over and gave it a gentle push that the 2 halves of the table fell down. This sword was very beautiful, especially the combination of strength and skill. Shea's eyes lit up when he saw this. The middle-aged warrior smiled and slowly said, We are from the Russell Mercenary Band. My name is Russell. Since you are an old man of Wildfire Town, then you must have heard of this name. I don't need to tell you about the reputation of our band. Shea nodded. He had indeed heard of the Russell mercenary group before. It was a very resounding name. A cold snort came from the side. A short and capable warrior stood out from the table. That person had a shaved head, but he had a fierce look on his face. He sneered, "Luo Su, your swordsmanship is good for splitting the table, but it's far from good for people." With that, he looked at Shea and said loudly, "We are from the Cossack mercenary group. You must have heard of this name before. I won't say anything else, but my men are all elite. Moreover, we have our own horses. My men are all excellent horsemen. Not to mention ordinary bandit bands, even if they encounter regular cavalry, my men won't be at a disadvantage." Cavalry? Shea's eyes lit up when he heard this. He was born in the Rhodian cavalry regiment and had a good impression of cavalry. Cossack? Humph, others may not know about your background, but do you think we don't know? Finally, the people sitting at the innermost table jumped up. This group of people were all tall and sturdy. The leader was a brawny man whose physique was almost comparable to Sharba's. He had broad shoulders and a round waist. He wore a circular breastplate and the muscles on his two exposed arms bulged. On his back, he carried a short double-bladed battle-axe. After jumping up, he pointed at the Cossack mercenary group and sneered, "Sir, don't believe them. Cossack? They used to be a group of mounted bandits. These people have dirty hands. Maybe they will lose face and rob the caravan they are protecting before they can even walk 100 li out of town. Damn it, it's you bastards who broke our rules." With that, he puffed out his chest and shouted, "We are the Fire Rhinoceros mercenary group. My name is Hawk. You hired us and I guarantee it. I have worked here for 10 years. My father died in the Dwarven territory in order to protect a guest. As long as we take your money, even if we have to risk our lives, we will guarantee your safety." The Cossack mercenary group was exposed and immediately flew into a rage out of humiliation. One by one, they jumped up and started cursing. The brawny man named Hua Ku stood there with a face full of arrogance. However, he stuck out his chest and coldly stared at the lean and small man. "What's wrong? I exposed your background and you want to fight? Humph, you have caused trouble for me 6 times and Lao Tzu broke a few bones each time. Do you want to break a few more bones today? Lao Tzu will fulfill your wish." The Cossack mercenary group had obviously suffered a lot under his hands. When they heard this, everyone's expression changed. Although they cursed even more fiercely, no one dared to step forward. Hawk spat and shouted, "Being a mercenary is a business where one puts one's life on the line. Since we are in this business, we must pay attention to credibility. The guest gave us money and we will fight with our lives. Lao Tzu looks down on your Cossack mercenary group. If you have the guts, then come over. Lao Tzu's hands are itching today. I will chop a few bastards and relax my muscles and bones." The Cossack mercenaries were so agitated that their faces turned red. Just as they were about to rush forward, they were stopped by the thin and capable man. The man coldly looked at Hawk and gritted his teeth. "Hawk, I'll remember this. You'll regret it one day. Lao Tzu will not fight with you for this business. However, today's matter will be settled together in the future." After he finished speaking, he did not look at Shea and turned around to leave with his men. The middle-aged man named Russell who was sitting at the door looked at Hua Ku. He hesitated for a moment and frowned. "Hua Ku, your father died not long ago. I know your people need this money. I won't fight with you this time." Pausing for a moment, the middle-aged man seemed to be quite kind as he slowly said, "Although the Cossacks are despicable, they are a pack of cunning wolves. Kid, you may be powerful, but you still have to be careful of their trick." After he finished speaking, he looked at Shea and sighed. He was about to leave with his men. "Wait." Shea smiled and walked over slowly. "I did not say that I will not hire you." Luo Su stared blankly for a moment, his expression somewhat embarrassed. He glanced at Huoku, who seemed to be an upright person. Huoku loudly said, "Since this guest has chosen your Luo Su regiment, this old man has nothing to be unconvinced about. As long as he doesn't fall into the hands of those Cossack-mounted bandits, everything is fine." After he finished speaking, he seemed to be helpless. He sighed and was about to leave. "You can't leave either." Shea smiled and stopped the burly man. "Both of you, I'll invite all of you." The two groups looked at Shea strangely. Shea smiled and said, "Wait a moment." He turned around and went back to his room upstairs. Not long after, he came out with 2 large leather bags, one in each hand. When he came downstairs, he shook the 2 bags on the table. Clatter, clatter, clatter. Suddenly, a large amount of shiny gold coins poured out. Seeing so many gold coins in front of him, although the mercenaries' complexion changed, they didn't show any unusual movements. Shea was somewhat satisfied in his heart and said with a smile, "Here are 300 gold coins, consider it as me paying half in advance. When I come back, there will be another 300. This money you two can divide it." In the room upstairs, Sharba and Philip heard the movement below. Sharba sighed, "Why waste so much money? It is useless to keep these 2 groups. As long as we bring sky attack, there will not be any great danger on the way. As for the territory of the Zaku natives, I heard that those natives rarely attack human merchant group." Philip and Sharba had run out to buy food today and were tired. After listening, he smiled faintly and said slowly, "You don't understand Sir's thoughts." "What are Shea's thoughts?" "I heard that we are short of money and yet we are spending it so recklessly. Anyway, Lao Tzu doesn't understand." "Don't tell me that an eccentric like you understands?" Sharba stared at Philip unhappily. Today, when the 2 of them went out to buy food, Philip was a shrewd man and was not willing to lose out in bargaining. If Sharba had gone alone, this boorish man would have been cheated by the group of profiteers in Wildfire Town. Sharba still did not have a good impression of Philip. At this moment, he was even more unconvinced. He thought to himself, "Lao Tzu and Shea are good brothers who fought their way out of piles of corpses. I don't understand him. Don't tell me that an eccentric like you understands?" Philip shook his head and chuckled. "The military of Moore County needs to be reorganized, and we are currently lacking a good source of soldiers. We can recruit more of the elite mercenaries of Wildfire Town. Your lordship's idea is not bad." Philip had indeed guessed Shea's thoughts correctly. If it was purely to hire bodyguards, then there was really no need to recruit so many mercenaries in Wildfire Town with great fanfare. Moreover, he had spent so much money to promote them. However, it was Shea who was envious of the elite and valiant mercenaries in Wildfire Town. These people were all elites who had experienced danger and seen blood. If they could be properly trained and disciplined, they would become an outstanding army. As for the price, it was a little expensive, but Shea did not have any soldiers in his hands at the moment. The military of Moore County was really too useless. It was not a bad idea to recruit some mercenaries to enrich the army and build a small elite force. Actually, it was not unprecedented for the Byzantine army to recruit mercenaries. It was just that the mercenaries were used to being lax and free. They could not stand the harsh discipline of the army. However, this was not the main problem. After all, mercenaries did not know their next meal. They risked their lives all year round to earn money. In fact, their income was not that high. When a mercenary worked for a lifetime, they could save up a few gold coins when they were old. When they returned to their hometown, they could buy some land for their retirement. It was already considered a good ending. Those who could enter the Byzantium army were paid and rations. Moreover, they spent most of their time training. After all, they did not have much time to fight. Moreover, once they left the army, they would receive a severance package. In terms of security and stability, it was much better than being a mercenary. The income was not much lower. However, many mercenaries were unwilling to enter the empire's official army. The main reason was that they did not have a chance to shine. The Byzantine Empire's military system was controlled by the warlord's henchmen. Although it had been broken, the Eagle faction could compete with the warlord's henchmen. However, in the Empire's army, any officer of a higher rank was based on background and experience. Those who were part of the warlord's henchmen or those who graduated from the Eagle faction's military academy, if you were an outsider, the warlord's henchmen would dislike you for not being one of their own. Naturally, they would not be willing to put you in an important position. Although the Eagle faction's henchmen did not have deep sectarian bias, the generals of the Eagle faction all had a bad habit. They were aloof. These people were all from the orthodox military academy. They had received a high level of military education and were considered elite talent. They also faintly looked down on those outsiders who came from an unorthodox background. Even for Shea, if it wasn't for his friendship with General Adrik and General Rohr, as well as his outstanding contributions in this war, the generals of the Eagle faction might not have accepted Shea. Even so, there were many people in the Eagle faction who looked down on Shea, who came from an unorthodox background. This situation created a situation where if one did not have a truly tyrannical ability or an extremely strong background, one would not be able to make a name for himself in the army. An outsider mercenary group joining the army? The leader of the mercenary group might be able to make a name for himself with his impressive martial skills. At most, he would be able to become a captain. As for the ordinary mercenaries, they would be soldiers for the rest of their lives. The slightly higher military positions were dominated by people from the two factions. They could not even compete for them. How could they let others take them? However, Shea did not care so much. He himself came from an unorthodox background and did not care about people's background and experience. He only knew that there were many elite mercenary groups in Wildfire Town. If he could recruit them as his subordinates, they would have great potential. The only problem was the cost. However, as long as he settled the deal with the Zakuta people and got the gold of the Zakuta people, would he be afraid of not having enough money? After staying in Wildfire Town for 3 more days, Shea and his party finally set off from Wildfire Town after collecting almost all the food that could be bought on the town's market. The Gallons Chamber of Commerce also helped a lot. They finally drove 50 carts full of food. The large group consisted of 50 carts with a total of 100 coachmen and drivers. There were also 2 mercenary groups with a total of 160 people. The Russell Mercenary Group and the Fire Rhinoceros Group had both joined in. Seeing that Shea had given them a lot of money, they simply brought all the men in their groups, including the elites. The number of people also exceeded Shea's expectations. In addition, there was also a caravan from the Gallons Chamber of Commerce. There were 6 carts, but they sent 30 elite warriors to protect them. The group, including Shea's group of 4 and the extra sky attack, made a total of 304 people. That morning, they set off from Wildfire Town and headed for the Red Wilderness. At this moment, the country bumpkin was riding at the front of the group. He looked at the dozens of carts behind him, which were majestically dragged into a long dragon. There were also elite mercenary warriors in full armor following in the formation. Looking at the endless wildfire plains in front of him, he felt a little emotional. Wildfire plains. Lao Tzu had returned here again. The last time he was here, Lao Tzu had shed blood and killed people. The first good friend he had made in his life had also died in his arms, but this time, it was a different scene. His identity was different now, and his mentality was also different. At this moment, the country bumpkin still did not know that this time, what awaited him on Wildfire Plains would be a test that would affect the rest of his life. Your Highness. The soft call startled Garcia, who was looking out of the window absent-mindedly. He slowly turned his head. Because he was in a daze and his train of thought was disturbed, Garcia's eyes revealed a faint trace of irritation. However, as the Crown Prince, he was famous for his attention to etiquette and appearance. Facing the respectful and strict female official in front of him, Garcia spoke in an impeccable voice. His tone and accent were very unique and had been cultivated for many years. It showed his gentleness and did not lose the dignity of a superior. "Tell me, how has she been recently?" The Crown Prince stood up and looked at the female official in front of him. This female official was the one beside Adeline. She had a serious expression on her face. Her hands were crossed in front of her and she bowed slightly. After a very standard etiquette, she replied in a meticulous tone, "Her Highness Adeline is very well. It's just that recently, she often closes herself in her room in a daze and does not ask to go out. When she has nothing to do, she reads in her room." "Reads?" Garcia raised his eyebrows slightly and seemed to be talking to himself. "Oh, when did she like to read?" After a pause, he looked at the female official and frowned. "What kind of books does she read?" "Imperial historical materials, general history of the continent, and so on." The female official pondered for a moment. "It seems that there are also some biographies of the great founding fathers." "Well, I saw that Her Highness Adeline has been reading a lot recently. Most of them are biographies of the Tulip family." "Biographies of Osgilla?" Garcia smiled slightly. "When did my sister become interested in military history?" "And?" The female official hesitated for a moment. She seemed to hesitate for a moment, but still mustered up the courage to say, "Her Highness Adeline's appetite has not been very good recently and she eats less. It seems that a young girl like her is bored to be cooped up in the castle all day. Her Highness the Crown Princess has recently gone to see her a few times. With Her Highness Daphne's company, Her Highness Adeline's mood seems to be better." "Okay, I understand." The Crown Prince raised his finger slightly and pulled out an embroidered handkerchief from his sleeve. He carefully wiped the corner of his mouth. "Keep a close eye on her. Don't let my sister run around again. Odin's diplomatic group is coming. This time they want to see Adeline. Father Emperor should agree. If Adeline runs away again, it will be difficult to explain to Odin's people. Since she has been interested in reading recently, go and arrange for the scholars and lecturers in the palace to teach her about history books. Also, get someone to move all the history books in my study to her. As long as she doesn't go out, she can do whatever she wants." The female official bowed and left. After she left, the Crown Prince threw the handkerchief on the table and turned his head to look at the sky outside the window. His expression seemed to be contemplating. Osgilla's biographies? This sister, when did she become interested in the Tulip family's matters? The Crown Prince was lost in thought for a moment. 3 soft knocks came from outside the door. Then, a person wearing a formal dress and a golden wig walked in. It was his housekeeper. "Your Highness, it's time." The housekeeper had one hand across his chest and the other behind his back. His standard bearing made the Crown Prince's eyebrows slightly relax. He seemed to be very satisfied with the other party's attire. He nodded. "I know. You have a quarter of an hour to have your afternoon tea, and then another quarter of an hour to change your clothes. The guests will arrive an hour before the banquet begins. If you don't have any special arrangements, I will arrange the time for your audience. There is no need for afternoon tea." The Crown Prince shook his head. He stood up and walked to a mirror in the room that was as tall as a grown man. He studied his reflection in the mirror. He had inherited the Night Spear Emperor's chiseled facial features, but his complexion was pale and weak. His expression was serious, his eyes were steady, and his hair and beard were meticulously trimmed. His bearing was impeccable, and there was not even a wrinkle on his clothes. He was very satisfied with his appearance, but he also knew that in the circle of nobles, there were many people who talked about him behind his back. They had a different evaluation of him, lethargic. Lethargic? Indeed, compared to the old but still outstanding father, He was usually too introverted. Although he was strict in his actions, but in the mouth of others, he was a lethargic. Lethargic? Garcia's habits, words, and actions were almost to the extreme. Every day, he would wake up at a certain time, a quarter later. Then, he would eat a piece of melon and a small piece of sirloin for breakfast, roasted until it was medium well. Garcia did not drink unless it was during a banquet. He did not like alcohol, nor did he like delicious food. He also did not have much of a preference for gorgeous things. As for antiques, he did not deliberately pursue them. When doing things, Garcia's biggest characteristic was accuracy. He hated everything that was out of his expectations. He liked to arrange everything into an accurate plan, and then complete it step by step. Even his habit of walking did not change at all. He had a habit. Every evening, he would take a stroll in the garden. He would walk one round around the garden of his palace, and in one round, he would take a total of 1,109 steps. Ever since he became an adult, his height and body did not change, and the number of steps he took did not change. Walking around the garden, 1,109 steps, not one step more, not one step less. He paid attention to his words and actions. Even his personal attendant, who had followed him for many years, rarely saw the crown prince lose control of his emotions. In recent years, the only time was when he heard the news of Bonfrit's death. The next morning, Garcia went to meet guests with a normal expression. He attended a salon in the noble circle, and even played polo with his friends for a while. Every afternoon, he would practice swordsmanship for an hour, and ride a horse for an hour. Therefore, even though he was already over 30 years old, his body was still very well maintained. Many young nobles around his age had already developed a bloated appearance when they were over 30 years old. Until now, the Crown Prince Garcia still had wide shoulders and a narrow waist. Even the court painter who painted him sighed with emotion. The Crown Prince's body had not changed for 10 years. His appearance when he was 20 years old was still the same now. He rarely showed his emotions, so he did not appear too warm or too cold to others. He was polite to everyone, and his attitude was gentle. However, within this gentleness, there was a strange distance. Even when he smiled at others, although his smile was warm, it did not hide the indifference that made people unable to approach him. Another word for strict was inflexible. Many people believed that Garcia was a rigid person who did not know how to be flexible. Therefore, the word lethargic naturally followed him for many years. Lethargic. Lethargic. Looking at the calm and steady face in the mirror, Garcia slowly unbuttoned his collar. He raised his hand slightly, and the door opened. A group of palace servants filed in, dragging a brand new and complicated ceremonial robe in their hands. Some helped him put on his collar, some helped him put on his clothes, some helped him with his belt, and some helped him put on his robe. There were also servants who brought plates of ornaments one by one for him to choose from. The time it took to dress up was not too long, not too little. The person in the mirror had already changed into a luxurious ceremonial robe. It had a soft fox collar, and the collar had an expensive sapphire as a button. The well-ironed ceremonial robe accentuated his waist, and the cut was very delicate. Every button on the double row was made of pure gold, but under the special design, it did not appear tacky at all. The shiny leather boots were so polished that one could almost see one's shadow. After a servant helped him comb his hair, 2 servants brought 2 small mirrors and stood on both sides, so that His Highness the Crown Prince could see his appearance in the mirror from several angles. After everything was done, Garcia became the Crown Prince that everyone was familiar with. Outstanding appearance, strict and steady. After the 2 servants carefully smoothed out an imperceptible crease on his trousers, the Crown Prince looked like an exquisite statue. Garcia revealed a satisfied expression. He was very satisfied with his current appearance. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly heard the sound of servants arguing outside the door. This movement made Garcia frown. "No, you can't go in. His Highness is changing." "No, please don't make things difficult for us, ah." After a few short exclamations, the door was slammed open with a bang. The two servants standing at the door were directly knocked to the side. Following that, a figure rushed in like a ball of fire and ran in front of Garcia. Ignoring the exclamations of the people around him, he punched Garcia directly on the nose. With a bang, Garcia's vision turned black and he fell backwards. Following that, the person pounced on him and continuously punched him. After being hit on the ground, Garcia was strangely silent. After 3 to 5 punches, the frightened servants at the side rushed up and pulled the person up. The Crown Prince was beaten until blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. However, there was no expression of pain or anger on his face. He slowly climbed up and did not look at the person who was firmly held down by the servants. First, he looked in the mirror and pulled out a handkerchief from his sleeve to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. Then, he grinned and turned to look at the person who was being held down by the servants but was still struggling endlessly. At this moment, Garcia suddenly laughed. "Let him go." The Crown Prince's voice did not seem to contain any anger. The servants were somewhat frightened, but they still let go. Fortunately, the person did not look like he was going to pounce on them again. He only stood there and coldly glared at the Crown Prince with a face full of anger. "All of you go out. Let me chat with the young Duke for a while." The Crown Prince looked at the somewhat dazed butler and smiled warmly. "I still have time, don't I?" "Yes, you cancelled afternoon tea, so you still have 15 minutes. "Very good. You may leave first." Garcia's tone was unquestionable. Soon, everyone had left. Only Garcia and the angry young man were left in the room. The young Duke of the Minas family, Rodi. "Your fists are still as hard as ever, Rodi." The Crown Prince looked at Rodi with a gentle expression. Then, he grinned. At this moment, he actually turned around and sat on the chair. Then, he unbuttoned his collar. "You deserve it." Rodi stood there with an angry expression. "I remember that I warned you. If you make my sister feel wronged again, I will definitely make you suffer." Garcia maintained a calm expression. He smiled and threw the handkerchief on the table. "I still have to attend a banquet later. You are delaying my time." "F***ck the banquet!" Rodi angrily shouted. "Yesterday, my sister came home. Although I do not know what happened, she hid in her room and cried all night." "Garcia, what did you do to her?" The Crown Prince's usually calm face suddenly revealed a mocking smile. "What did I do to her? Rodi, you are really stupid. It is precisely because I did not do anything to her that she cried." Rodi's face turned red. He could not say anything and could only stare fiercely at Garcia. Garcia's eyes flashed with a strange smile. Then, he sighed. "Fine. I will also tell you this. This is the last time you will hit me." He stood up and walked in front of the mirror. Looking into the mirror, he grimaced. Seeing that the corner of his eye was a little bruised, he seemed somewhat dissatisfied. He frowned and said, "I'm serious. This is the last time you offend me. I have always allowed you to act recklessly because you are Rodi. I do not have many friends. You can say that you are the only one." "Humph. I have never treated you as a friend." Rodi could not help but stab him. "Ever since Daphne married you, you have not treated her well. You are no longer my friend. That is not important." The Crown Prince smiled faintly. "I understand. That is why I do not blame you. However, I will also tell you this. This is the last time I will tolerate your disrespect. The last time." "Humph. What if there is a next time?" Rodi sneered. "You are the Crown Prince, the future Emperor. Are you prepared to severely punish me?" "No, I will not do that." The Crown Prince's tone was very gentle. "However, the next time I will fight back." He smiled gently and walked back to Rhodey. His tone was gentle and warm. Rhodey, it is best that such a thing does not happen again. I do not like to attack people. You also know that I do not like to use force and I do not like to hurt my friends. That is why I ask that you do not force me. After that, the Crown Prince's eyes turned cold. He turned his back to Rhodey and carefully looked at himself in the mirror. He coldly said, "If you are done, you can bow and leave. Remember your identity and bearing. Rhodey, you will be the future Duke. You are the role model for the nobles of the Byzantine Empire." Rhodey's face was ashen. He clenched his fists but did not say a word. He snorted and turned to rush out of the door. He rushed out of the Crown Prince's room in one breath. Under the strange gazes of the guards and servants outside, Rhodey rushed downstairs to the lobby. He ran out of the Crown Prince's palace through the main door. Only then did he feel the pressure on his chest relax. He really wanted to rush up and give him 2 more punches. However, he did not know why, but at that moment, although the Crown Prince's back was facing him, Rhodey could clearly see the Crown Prince's face in the mirror. That face was smiling. Although it wasn't that this meticulous fellow didn't smile normally, his usual smile was the kind of polite smile. Even when he smiled, there wasn't a trace of a smile in his eyes. However, just now, the Crown Prince's face in the mirror was really smiling at him. That smile was full of ridicule and disdain. Moreover, that smile was so unscrupulous. That smile was so unfathomable. That kind of smile was filled with a sense of superiority, as if he was facing an insignificant ant crawling in front of him. At that moment, Rhodey did not know why, but his heart suddenly felt uncomfortable. A familiar feeling of oppression spread throughout his body. He clenched his fists but could not punch out. It was as if his subconscious was telling him that if he dared to attack, something terrifying would happen. That smile, that unfathomable look, was faintly familiar. It seemed like there was someone else he knew who looked like this when they smiled. After carefully recalling for a while, Rhodey suddenly felt cold and broke out in cold sweat. I remember now. It's Cavalier. The Crown Prince's back in the mirror smiled. That smile was so similar to that terrifying old man Cavalier. In front of the mirror, the Crown Prince rearranged his clothes with the help of the servants. A delicate young servant carefully picked out a box of cooling ointment with his little finger and carefully applied it to the corner of the Crown Prince's bruised eye. The Crown Prince coldly looked at the mirror. No matter how he tried to cover it, the bruises at the corner of his eye could not be immediately removed. "My dear Chief Steward," the Crown Prince called out softly. The Chief Steward immediately lowered his head and stood behind him. "I need you to do something. Do it personally." "Yes, Your Highness," the Chief Steward quickly responded. The Crown Prince took a breath. He spoke very slowly and in a lukewarm tone. "Go and see my dear wife. Tell her that because of her lack of self-control, I was injured by her dear brother. Therefore, in order to punish her for her careless actions, I hope that she will stay in the castle. It would be best if she does not go out for a month and reflect on her actions. I believe that my dear wife will certainly understand such a request of mine." The Chief Steward trembled. He was an old man by Garcia's side. He had followed the Crown Prince for more than 20 years. Therefore, he was familiar with the temperament of the Crown Prince. Although the Crown Prince was usually neither happy nor angry, he had followed him for many years. From some details, he could grasp some signs of the changes in His Highness' mood. Whenever His Highness was at his angriest, he would appear to be very slow on the surface. The slower he spoke, the angrier he was in his heart. Especially when he addressed someone as dear. Once he said it, it meant that His Highness was unable to restrain his anger. The Chief Steward trembled and quickly lowered his head. "All right, no need to tidy up." The Crown Prince suddenly turned around and left the mirror. The servants standing by the mirror were all stunned. "I can't attend the banquet with this attitude. Cancel it." The Crown Prince sighed and walked to the window. Everyone leave. The chief steward stays. When the servants carefully left, the chief steward stood behind the Crown Prince. Your Highness, I need to go out for a while. The Crown Prince turned around and looked at the old chief steward who had followed him for 20 years. His eyes seemed to reveal a trace of genuine exhaustion. I need to rest. Well, you know where I am. If there's anything, help me cover it up. With that, he walked up to the old chief steward and reached out to press on the other's shoulder. At this moment, the gentleness in his eyes revealed his true feelings. He whispered, Jacques, I'm very tired. Jacques' face changed. He hesitated for a moment and finally sighed. He raised his hand and pressed on the Crown Prince's hand on his shoulder. He whispered, Your Highness, I understand. Well, it's not my body that's tired, but, here. Garcia pointed to his heart. At this moment, his face was pale. Then his eyes swept over and looked at Jacques. Actually, Jacques, I know that you've always been very afraid because you know my secret. So, you've always been very afraid of me, afraid that I'll kill you to silence you, right? Jacques' face trembled, and he suddenly knelt down with a plop. I won't, Jacques. Garcia's face was very calm. He smiled faintly. I'm very tired, so there's someone by my side who knows my secret. I can be undisguised in front of you. This makes me very relaxed. So, you can rest assured that I won't kill you. About an hour later, in Osjila's arena, there was a huge competition of this year's martial arts competition. Because it had entered the main competition stage, the arena that could accommodate tens of thousands of people was almost full. The huge arena was like a beehive. Fanatical shouts and noisy voices drifted in the air and lingered. Tens of thousands of people shouted and roared together, unscrupulously venting the violent emotions in their hearts. On the arena in the square, a burly warrior with a ferocious smile split his opponent's sword and shield into two halves with a battle-axe. The handle of the axe viciously stabbed into the opponent's chest. The crisp sound of bones bursting, even under the roar of the audience, seemed to be so clear. Seeing a warrior on the stage fall to the ground and vomit blood, the ferocious warrior with the axe walked over, grabbed the opponent's hair, and lifted him up. Tens of thousands of people in the audience were roaring, fanatically venting their violent emotions. Kill him! Kill him! Kill him! Kill him! In the chaotic and violent atmosphere, no one would notice that in the most inconspicuous corner of the southern stands, among the crowd, there was a pale and handsome young man. He was wearing dirty linen clothes and a felt hat full of oil on his head. He was sitting in the crowd. His originally handsome and calm face was full of violence and ferocity. His originally handsome facial features were twisted into a ball. Sandwiched among tens of thousands of people, this young man's face was also twisted. His eyes were full of violence. He raised his fist high and roared with a hoarse voice. Kill! Kill! All of this seemed to be a secret. Shout loudly, begging for votes. The votes now are too ugly, please give me some motivation. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 187. The 176th chapter, Chaos Awakening. Before dawn, the majestic city of Osjila had yet to awaken from its slumber. This majestic city of the continent, the most prosperous city of miracles, appeared to still be sleeping peacefully. The streets were cold and cheerless. Occasionally, a gust of cold wind would blow, startling a shivering stray dog in the corner. The stray dog raised its head and looked around before diving into a nearby pile of trash. The road was cold and cheerless. There was not a single soul on the large street. Occasionally, there would be a group of city defense patrols shuddering in the cold wind. As they walked, their armor, which had already been frozen to the point of being cold, would make clanking sounds. The hot air in the mouths of the soldiers would turn into white mist as they cursed the damned weather in their hearts. Indeed, compared to previous years, this year's early spring was shockingly cold. Austria was still peaceful, and the nobles and rich people were living their lives in a drunken stupor. It seemed like the war last year was far away from them. After all, the Byzantines would fight the Ottoman Empire 2 or 3 times every once in a while, and it seemed like they were already used to it. This was because the Byzantium people had a deep-rooted belief. No matter what, with the powerful foundation of the Byzantine Empire, no matter how fierce the Ottoman barbarians were, they would never be able to defeat them. This belief was very popular among the upper echelons of the Byzantine Empire. Even many scholars of the empire held this belief. No matter if it was in terms of population or the vastness of the land, even if the Ottoman people had a slight advantage on the battlefield, they did not have the strength to destroy the Byzantine Empire. Byzantium had a population of several tens of millions. The population was several times that of the Ottoman people. The land area was even more vast. Although the land of the Ottoman people was also very vast, most of it was the land of ice and snow in the north. The real farmland was much less than Byzantium. Moreover, the Ottoman people were known for their barbarism. In terms of overall national strength and civilization, they were far inferior to the Byzantium people. Based on this belief, the occasional war, victory or defeat, did not seem to be that important. In the upper echelons of the empire, there were more things that were worth paying attention to. The warlords were busy fighting for power with the royal family. They were trying to force the royal family to make concessions and cut off more districts to set up new military regions. The royal family was busy fighting with the big shots in the military. The nobles were busy quarreling with the Senate. There were many requests to simply abolish the Senate and replace it with the Parliament of Nobles to obtain a higher political status. In the past few days, everyone in the imperial capital was undoubtedly concerned about the health of His Majesty in the palace. The current Emperor of the Empire, His Majesty the Lance Emperor, His Majesty Cantos, had been seriously ill for the past few days. The bitter cold of early spring was the most unbearable for an old man like him who was plagued with illness. In fact, ever since the spring hunt, His Majesty's health had not been good. It seemed that drinking to his heart's content on the hunting ground had added a lot of burden to his already ill body. After returning to the palace, His Majesty's health had not improved. It was said that he had been eating less and less recently. The palace doctors had repeatedly requested His Majesty to stop drinking, but the heroic Emperor Cantos was unable to do so. According to some news in the palace, it was said that His Majesty vomited blood again 2 days ago. The entanglement of the illness, coupled with the bitter cold of early spring, caused some of the old injuries that His Majesty had in his early years to erupt. It was said that His Majesty had been in a coma for a day. After the palace doctors gave His Majesty a consultation, it was said that when they left, the faces of the palace doctors were very gray. Many sensitive people could not help but guess. Perhaps it was time for the imperial power to change again? Just when everyone thought that His Majesty Cantos was dying, even the Prime Minister and various ministers kept entering the palace to check on His Majesty's condition. Mr. Cavashier, who was the most trusted by His Majesty, simply moved into the palace. The leader of the Dark Knight Imperial Forest, the most loyal death warrior of the Emperor, the infamous Butcher, did not leave Cantos' side at all. Even the palace guards around the palace where His Majesty lived were all replaced. It was time, everyone had the same thought. The old man who had ruled the empire for decades should have reached the end of his life. But in the end, something happened that surprised everyone. The Emperor was seriously ill and finally summoned the Crown Prince, His Highness Garcia. When the father and son met, the Emperor also summoned the Prime Minister, the Duke of Minas, and several other important ministers, but that meeting turned into a farce. It was said that the Emperor originally intended to pass on the throne, But for some reason, when His Majesty saw the Crown Prince, he suddenly flew into a rage and scolded the Crown Prince in front of several important people. His words were very sharp, and he even directly shed all pretense of cordiality. He scolded all the unspeakable things that he had said in the past. It was said that His Majesty actually scolded the Crown Prince in front of the Prime Minister, the Duke of Minas, and the others, saying that he was a good-for-nothing who did not make progress. The focus of his criticism was mainly on the Crown Prince's private life, and an accusation of having no children was pressed on the Crown Prince. It was almost as if the Emperor directly exposed the Crown Prince's eccentricity of liking men and not women. As His Majesty spoke, he flew into a rage and sat up from his sickbed. He grabbed a candlestick at the head of the bed and threw it at the Crown Prince's face. The metal candlestick hit the Crown Prince's forehead on the spot, and his face was immediately covered in blood. Seeing this scene, the Prime Minister, the Duke of Minas, and the other officials were stunned, and hurriedly went up to calm the Emperor. The Crown Prince himself knelt there silently, allowing the blood to flow on his face and stain his collar. This usually silent and strict Highness did not seem to have any reaction, nor did he seem to be angry or angry. He still had the same indifferent and silent expression that had not changed for many years. He quietly took out a silk handkerchief to wipe the blood, and then knelt there without saying a word. He was like a dough, and no matter how His Majesty kneaded it, there was no reaction. As the Crown Prince, he was so weak that the other officials could not help but sigh in their hearts. Even someone as strong as Emperor Cantos was almost suffocated by the warlord's henchmen in the military. In the future, when the feminine and cowardly Highness Garcia ascended to the throne, who knew how arrogant and despotic those warlords' henchmen would be that night, according to unreliable rumors, after the Crown Prince and the other officials left, His Majesty coughed up 3 large bowls of blood on his sickbed. The Emperor's personal attendants were so frightened that their faces turned pale. They hurriedly summoned the Crown Prince and the other officials, who had already returned home. At that time, everyone thought that His Majesty was really going to die this time. According to tradition, the officials waited outside His Majesty's chambers until dawn. Even the Prime Minister was silently planning how to proceed with the Emperor's funeral and coronation ceremony. He even sent someone to inform His Majesty the Pope that very night to wake him up from his sleep, so that he could prepare for the Emperor's death at any time. But then a miracle happened. After waiting in the cold night for an entire night, Emperor Cantos miraculously took a turn for the better when dawn broke. When His Majesty summoned the officials again, his complexion was obviously much better. Although he still coughed occasionally, his face was no longer as pale and frightening as before. Soon, in less than 2 days, His Majesty was able to get out of bed again. He seemed to have regained his health in an instant. He even took the time to review the palace guard's drill. Some people said that His Majesty walked as if he was flying. He didn't even need anyone to help him get on his horse. He even rode a few laps around the palace's stud farm. However, after reviewing the palace guard's drill, His Majesty seemed to be very dissatisfied with the training of the palace guards. On the same day, His Majesty removed the position of commander of the palace guards and demoted the commander, who was loyal to the imperial family, to a local army as a miscellaneous general. Following that, His Majesty gave the order to transfer an emblem regiment from the Osgilla City Guards to the Palace Guards. Another emblem regiment from the Central Army's 6th Corps, which was Rabbit Roar's old troop, was to be transferred to the Osgilla City Guards. Such a transfer immediately aroused the sensitivities of the military department. However, considering the Emperor's poor health, every emperor in history would make similar transfers to stabilize the Emperor's power before passing away. Therefore, the military department silently endured and didn't obstruct the transfer. However, the Emperor's subsequent order caused an uproar. Emperor Cantos gave the order to transfer the Crown Prince Garcia to the 13th Corps for training. He gave him the empty title of observer and ordered him not to delay any further. He was to take up the post immediately upon receiving the order. Throwing the Empire's Crown Prince to the most difficult and dangerous 13th Corps for training? This decision immediately shocked everyone. In the past, even if the Emperor wanted his successor to gain some experience, although he would send them to the army to develop some knowledge in military strategy, he would try his best to choose a relatively safe place, such as the city guard army, or a place from the standing army that was relatively close to the imperial capital to gain some experience. However, the 13th Corps was the famous Rodria Corps. Although it was the Empire's first Iron Army, this Iron Army was synonymous with danger, harshness, and the casualty rate was extremely high. Moreover, after experiencing the great battle with Odin, Roar took over the Rhodian Cavalry Regiment. This army was currently stationed at the Empire's northeastern border. The conditions there were very difficult, but the people were valiant. His Majesty gave the order to allow Roar to recruit soldiers there to replenish the soldiers lost in the previous battle. Moreover, that place was not far from the wildfire plains in the north. Once there was a battle with Odin, the Rhodian Cavalry Regiment would undoubtedly rush to the battlefield at the first opportunity. Being sent to the Rhodian Cavalry Regiment as an observer was really not a good choice. Perhaps some people would think that if there was going to be a war, they would immediately summon the Crown Prince back, and there would be no danger. However, the order to send the Crown Prince was publicly announced. With great fanfare, everyone would know. However, if they summoned the Crown Prince back once there was a war, then they would lose a lot of face. Not to mention other things, if they thought that he was a coward, they would never be able to get rid of it. As the Emperor, how could he harm his successor like this? More importantly, the training time was also wrong. If it was in the past, throwing the Crown Prince away for training would not be a big deal. However, the problem was that the old Emperor was seriously ill. Although his body had suddenly recovered a lot recently, who could guarantee that this was not the final radiance of the setting sun? If the old Emperor suddenly passed away, then the Crown Prince would be at the border of the Empire, far away from the imperial capital. When the time came for the succession of the throne, it would be hard to guarantee that there would not be any problems. At this time, it was unwise to send the Crown Prince away. If it was in another country or another dynasty, if the Emperor tormented the Crown Prince like this, then everyone would definitely think that the Emperor was dissatisfied with the Crown Prince and wanted to appoint another heir. However, the problem was that Emperor Cantos only had this one son. For this order, the Prime Minister and other officials of the Empire bitterly persuaded the Emperor for a whole day, but Emperor Cantos was firm and unwavering. As for the Crown Prince himself, after receiving the order, he did not resist. On the same day, he packed his luggage and went to the military to retrieve the appointment document. On the same day, he brought a group of guards and left the northern city. He did not even enter the imperial palace to see his father. Many people thought that the Crown Prince left in a fit of anger. No matter what, the Crown Prince left Osgilla very quickly. Emperor Cantos swept away his sickly appearance and appeared in front of the officials every day in high spirits. In 3 days, he issued 16 orders in one go. These 16 orders were mainly for the reorganization of the Empire's central standing army after this war, especially the 2nd and 9th Army that had been destroyed by Hastings's surprise attack during the war. The Emperor ordered that the backbone of the Empire's city guard be transferred to the 2nd and 9th Army, and then a batch of graduates from the Imperial Military Academy be transferred to the 2nd and 9th Army to serve as low-ranking officers. As for the selection of the Army's general, the Emperor and the higher-ups of the military fought back and forth several times before finally coming to a compromise. The 13th Corps' 1st Emblem Regiment's flag-bearer Soja was transferred to the 2nd Army's general. The 13th Corps' 4th Emblem Regiment's flag-bearer Butler was transferred to the 9th Army's general. The imperial family vowed not to give in to these two candidates. After the military stubbornly resisted for a few days, the emperor made a compromise in other aspects. The 3 counties in the southern region of the empire were transferred from the empire's administrative region to the nearby Tima military district. 3 counties in exchange for 2 armies' general positions. It was hard to say who won in this confrontation between the imperial family and the military. But no matter what, after the series of orders were issued, everyone's eyes were focused on one person, Audiobook. Many people were shocked to find out that after the series of appointments, the biggest beneficiary was actually the newly appointed imperial military vice minister. It must be known that Audiobook had worked in the 13th Corps for 9 years and could be said to have won the hearts of the soldiers. This time, 2 flag-bearers from the 13th Corps were transferred to be the generals of the other corps. In the military, seniority and background were the most important things. The most important thing was the relationship between the old subordinates and the old subordinates. The newly appointed generals of the 2nd and 9th Corps were all Audiobook's old subordinate. With this, his influence in the military would greatly increase in the future. In addition, the 13th Corps was originally his old unit. Although Roer had taken over the position of general, how could the influence of 9 years be so easily removed? Moreover, Roer was not a person who liked to abuse power. With Audiobook's 9 years of management in the 13th Corps, who in the Corps did not remember his good deeds? With this, the empire had a total of 13 standing corps, and 3 of them could be considered Audiobook's subordinates. There was even a view among the upper echelons of the empire. In the empire's military, after the original Duke of Minas's faction, a new Audiobook's faction would be born in the next 10 years. Of course, when calculating this Audiobook's faction, many people also included Shea because Shea used to be Audiobook's personal guard and was also from the 13th Division. After becoming the military chief of a county, he was naturally considered to be under Audiobook's direct command. Many people were discussing that His Majesty was deliberately cultivating Audiobook. After all, although the Duke of Minas's influence was outstanding, he was after all old. No one knew how long this veteran of the empire's military could live. The emperor was relying on the Duke of Minas's influence to control the military, but once the Duke of Minas passed away, a new heavyweight would be needed to replace the Duke of Minas's role. Without a doubt, Audiobook, who was born in the Eagle faction, had outstanding military achievements, was loyal to the empire, and was distinct from the warlord party, was a very suitable candidate. However, there were also people who thought that the emperor was muddle-headed due to old age. Although Soja and Butler were rare and outstanding generals in the military, they were still Audiobook's former subordinates and had always been arrogant. It would be very difficult for Roer to subdue these veterans in the military. Even veterans in the 13th Division, like them, would find it difficult to be subdued by Roer. This was especially true for Soja. This fellow used to lead the heavy cavalry emblem regiment in the 13th Division. They were the elites of the elites in the 13th Division and the person Audiobook valued the most. Audiobook even intended to replace him as the general of the 13th Division in the future. But in the end, His Majesty ordered Audiobook to be transferred away and sent Roer and Fatso over. These veteran flag-bearers in the 13th Division might not be convinced. Fortunately, during the previous battle, Roer's troops had fought together with the 13th Division and had some friendly relations. That was why there was no public opposition from the subordinate. However, people like Soja, who was originally slated to be the future general of the 13th Division, were naturally disappointed. His Majesty ordered him to be transferred away. Although Roer's heart ached at the loss of an outstanding cavalry general, he was also relieved. During the previous battle, the commanders of the 13th Division, including the 3rd Emblem Regiment commander, Fontana, had died in battle while he was in charge of bringing up the rear. Now that Soja and the silver-haired butler had been transferred away, more than half of the veteran Emblem Regiment commanders had left. It would be much easier for Roar to subdue this army in the future. After sending off Soja and the silver-haired butler, who had been ordered to be transferred away, the two veterans in the 13th Division did not feel dissatisfied. After all, they had jumped from the Emblem Regiment level to the general level. In the future, they would be considered as military leaders on the same level as Roar. However, the two of them opened their hearts and had a deep conversation with Roar. They requested that Roar lead the 13th Division well and not let the spirit of the 13th Division down. The two of them were honest. During the days that Roar had been transferred, everyone had clearly seen and understood that this rabbit general was not an idiot. He was indeed a capable person. However, he was good at running away and was not compatible with the spirit of the 13th Division. Everyone had some misgivings in their hearts. After sending off the two of them, Fatso held a military meeting in his tent. Now, the people who were left behind were all his trusted old subordinates from the 6th Corps. Among them were a few veterans from the 13th Corps. They were all loyal to Roar. Roar recklessly commented on the Emperor's recent actions and sighed. Who said that His Majesty is old and muddle-headed? His recent actions are truly worthy of respect. However, I'm afraid that most of it is due to that old fellow Cavishier's wisdom. After saying this, he paused and ordered, "All emblem groups get ready. Let's prepare to welcome the arrival of His Highness, the Crown Prince. His Majesty has sent the Crown Prince to us. This is the greatest trust that His Majesty has for the 13th Division. Everyone be careful. Don't let the 13th Division's prestige be tarnished." After giving the order, everyone left. Roar sat heavily on the fur-cushioned chair and took a big bite of the sweet potato. After chewing it a few times, his cheeks bulged and his expression was somewhat ferocious. "Damn it, this is a very dangerous move. The Emperor is probably determined to openly take action against the warlord party. That's why he purposely sent the Crown Prince to me. The 13th Division has always been the most loyal troop to the Empire. Once His Majesty breaks off relations with the military headquarters, it may cause a rebellion. The imperial capital will become the most dangerous place. By sending the Crown Prince to me, he wants me to protect this future Crown Prince." After pausing for a while, Roar threw away the sweet potato in his hand and walked quickly to the wall. Looking at the map on it, his eyebrows were tightly knitted together. How does His Majesty plan to take action? From the inside out? Or from the inside out? Once he breaks off relations with the warlord party, those fellows won't be willing to sit still and wait for their deaths. I'm afraid they will rebel immediately. I have to be prepared here and mobilize the troops to the south to rescue the Emperor. However, this place is the key. Damn it, why did he designate this place as a military zone in the first place? Isn't he putting a shackle on his neck? The place pointed on the map was the military districts of Armenia, which was close to the north of imperial capital Osgelia. This military zone was rich in iron ore and was famous for its armor and soldiers. Most importantly, its geographical location was close to Osgilia's imperial capital. If they set off from Armenia and rushed on horses, as long as they did not encounter any obstacles, they would be able to reach imperial capital Osgelia in 2 days' time. Such an important force of the warlord party was right under the nose of the imperial capital. It was undoubtedly a sharp blade on the imperial family's neck. After pausing for a while, Roar suddenly laughed strangely. "Observer, it's the damn observer again. Last time, it was that damned rabbit Bonfreet who became the observer. He also came to the 13th Division from below. In the end, that guy really became a dead rabbit. Humph, this time it's the Crown Prince himself, and he's even an observer. Damn it, it's too unlucky." Thinking of this, Roar sighed. After hesitating for a moment, he finally shouted, "Men, Outside the tent, a soldier immediately ran in to pass the order. Pass down my order. The third emblem group is to immediately move to the south. Station 100 miles to the south. Then, have them move 10 miles to the south every 3 days. If the local government comes to inquire, just say that we are training new recruits and are doing long-distance training exercises in the spring. The soldier straightened his back and bowed before leaving. Roar, however, seemed to be nervous. His eyes flashed as he stared at the map on the wall. The internal strife is about to begin. Damn it, once we're in chaos, Odin's people will definitely take advantage of the situation. Odin. Damn it, Shea, you brat, you just happen to be at the northern border. Once Odin's people attack, you'll be the first stone under the iron hooves of Odin's people. Haha, if you understand the reason behind this, I'm afraid this brat will be so angry that he'll curse. Humph, brat, whether you're a hero or a coward depends on your performance in the future. I'm vomiting blood. Please recommend me. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com to read more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 188. Damn, I am late again. My hand was too slippery. I originally intended to write 10,000 words, but I couldn't stop myself. I wrote 15,000 words and I am already late by 2 hours. However, writing more and updating more is always a good thing. Please vote. GOR Chapter 177. Strength of 1,000. Shio. A sharp arrow shot out and pierced through the head of a wild boar that was running through the underbrush. The arrow pierced through the brain, and the wild boar fell to the ground without making a sound. Good archery! Amidst the cheers, 2 mercenaries ran over and kicked the body of the wild boar. Then, they turned around and laughed. It's dead. Tonight we can have a good meal. The one who shot the arrow was the captain of the Russell mercenary group, the middle-aged warrior named Russell. He put down the bow in his hand and appeared proud of himself amidst the cheers. However, he pretended to be reserved and smiled. It is just the beginning of spring. These wild boars are not fat enough. If it is autumn, these wild boars will be full of fat. Roasting them over a fire will give them a good taste. Shea smiled, but before he could speak, a group of majestic men beside him had a somewhat unconvinced look on their faces. Their leader was the leader of the Flame Rhinoceros mercenary group, Hoka. Hoka was unwilling to see Russell in the limelight alone. He laughed loudly and shouted, "Leader Russell, your archery skills are really good, but this beast is not enough for so many people. Let me add another dish for everyone." Finished speaking, he turned around and shouted. A few trusted mercenaries immediately followed him and spurred their horses out. Several people quickly rushed into the forest. Shea's heart was moved and he also spurred his horse to follow. Hoka looked back and saw Shea following him. He smiled and said, "Sir, are your hands also itching?" Shea laughed. "You don't know. Before I joined the army, I was a hunter in the wildfire plains. Hunting is my favorite thing." They galloped through the forest for a while. Suddenly, Shea raised his hand. "Stop!" Shea wrinkled his nose and smelled a strange smell in the air. He laughed and said, "Ha! There's a pretty big guy." The few of them dismounted and looked around for a while. Shea's nose was very sensitive, so he quickly found the source of the smell. He found traces of urine beside a bush. Shea smiled and said, "This is a big guy. These animals like to use the smell of urine to mark their territory. I'm afraid we have intruded into its territory. Be careful." With a wave of his hand, several of his warriors took down the short axes hanging on their backs. Several people searched along the thicket. Not long after, they suddenly heard an "Ao" roar, and a mountain cat with brightly colored fur scurried out from the thicket. This beast's body was majestic, but after all, Shea and others had a large number of people. This beast didn't dare to hurt people, so it turned around and fled into the thicket. Hoka laughed and suddenly whistled. The whistle was sharp. Shea hadn't yet recovered when he saw the flame rhinoceros mercenaries shout. Several people stood together and waved their arms at the same time. Several short axes were thrown out. That mountain cat was still fleeing through the forest. Suddenly, several short axes flew over and chopped down on its body. The beast howled in grief and was immediately cut down. Hoka cheered and ran over. He had a majestic figure and carried the lynx on his shoulder. He laughed and said, "All right. This guy is heavy enough." Shea's heart skipped a beat. He glanced at the few flame rhino mercenaries beside him. These fellows threw their axes in unison. Clearly, this was a well-practiced tactic. If they could gather more than 100 people and form a formation, these men's arms were obviously thick and strong. With over 100 axes thrown out, how powerful would that be? Shea's face carried a smile. He couldn't help but feel more and more tempted. That night, the group set up camp in this forest. A mountain cat and a wild boar weighed at least 1 to 200 gene. These mercenaries were all veterans who were used to living in the wilderness. They skinned the animals, opened the boar, and roasted the meat. With over 300 people, each of them was given a large piece of fragrant roasted meat. Shea also had his men take out several large barrels of wheat wine that he had brought with him from Wildfire Town. These mercenaries were immediately overjoyed. These mercenaries who risked their lives to make a living all day long didn't dislike drinking wine. Each of them was a hero in wine. When the large barrels of wheat wine were distributed, a wave of cheers immediately followed. Shea, Hoka and Russell were sitting together. Both of them were targets that Shea wanted to recruit. But in his heart, he liked the burly Hoka more. This Hoka was young, had a bold and powerful appearance, and his temperament was also forthright and unyielding. Shea's temperament was most suited to him. In contrast, Russell was older and more worldly. He was a meticulous person, and spoke and did things with reservations. It had already been 3 days since they set out. It was difficult for the group to increase their speed. Shea deliberately made friends with these mercenaries along the way. He was originally a hunter in the wilderness. Although he had become a high-ranking official, he didn't put on any airs. He ate and lived with these mercenaries. Shea saw that this officer didn't put on any airs and also wanted to get close to him. During their conversation, Shea roughly grasped the other party's direct line of command. The Fire Rhino mercenary group, led by Hawk, was originally a first-rate mercenary group in Wildfire Town. It had an outstanding reputation and excellent reputation. However, 2 years ago, Hawk's father, who was the original leader of the Fire Rhino mercenary group, was on a mercenary mission to protect a human merchant group passing through the dwarven territory of Blue Basin. In the end, they were besieged by dwarves for some reason. Hawk's father died in battle to protect the guest, and the remaining subordinates desperately escaped. In that battle, many of the Fire Rhino mercenary group's elites died or were injured. Immediately, their reputation was not as great as before. Fortunately, Hawk's martial skills were not ordinary, and he had a forthright personality. He was also very popular in the mercenary group. After his father's death, he took up the banner. He had an unyielding and upright personality, and was the most trustworthy person. He would do what he said. In less than 2 years, the Fire Rhino mercenary group's reputation gradually recovered. Several large merchant groups were very willing to hire a mercenary group with good reputation like Hawk's to act as guards. As for Russell, he was an old man in this line of work. He had debuted at the age of 18 and had been a mercenary for more than 20 years. The Russell mercenary group was formed by himself with a group of old brothers 10 years ago. He was meticulous and cautious, and he himself was quite accomplished in martial arts. Over the years, he had relied on his caution to expand the Russell mercenary group to its current size. It could be considered one of the top 5 mercenary groups in Wildfire Town. Hawk's personality was fiery, while Russell was mature and steady. The personalities of these two leaders were different, and even the styles of the two mercenary groups under them were as different as heaven and earth. When they hurried along during the day, dozens of large carriages formed a long line in front and back. The carriages were filled to the brim with food and covered with oilcloth. The two mercenary groups were responsible for guarding the carriages. Hawk's men stood guard outside the carriages, while Russell's men guarded the carriages. Along the way, the fiery warriors of the Fire Rhino mercenary group behaved as flamboyantly as their leader. Each of the young and valiant men rode on their horses and didn't stop for even a moment. One rider after another galloped around the caravan. The men on the horses were all vigorous and vigorous. They would even let out whistles from time to time. The men of the Russell mercenary group closely guarded the carriages. Most of them didn't make a sound, but they wore their weapons and armor neatly and lined up in a strict formation. 2 or 3 people were assigned to guard each carriage, and they hurried along in silence. After leaving Wildfire Town, they traveled for 3 days and didn't encounter any trouble. Although there were many magic beasts roaming the Wildfire Plains, most of the powerful magic beasts were intelligent. With such a large group of people passing by, the individual magic beasts would flee far away. As for the bandit groups of the Wildfire Plains and the Black Tribe, they didn't see a single one. Presumably, with the two mercenary groups working together to protect the goods, those ordinary bandit groups and the Black Tribe wouldn't dare act rashly after hearing the news. It was just that this journey was peaceful, and Russell and the others seemed to be very satisfied. However, Huoku started to feel bored and couldn't help but complain. This journey was really too boring. His brothers were so bored that their hands and feet were itching. They couldn't wait for a few bandits to appear and relieve their boredom. When Russell heard this, he only smiled faintly and then muttered to himself for a moment before seriously advising, "Huoku, we mercenaries lick the blood on the blade's edge. Using our lives to earn hard-earned money is our duty. But after all, our brothers' lives are also our own. It's best if we don't risk our lives. In our hearts, we still hope that the journey can be peaceful. Taking risks is our duty. If there is danger, everyone will risk their lives. But we also need to consider the safety of our brothers. Your temper is still too impatient. As a leader, you can't blindly be brave and ruthless." When Huoku heard this, although he expressed his agreement on the surface, he didn't agree with it in his heart. He only felt that this leader Russell was old and that his temper and courage had been worn out. When Shea heard this from the side, his heart suddenly moved. He immediately made a decision. From tomorrow onwards, Russell's men and Huoku's men would exchange missions. Russell's men would be in charge of guarding and searching the perimeter. Huoku's men would stay behind and follow the group. Shea's intention was very clear. Although Huoku's men were full of vigor, they were far from being as meticulous as Russell's men. This matter of guarding the perimeter was like being a scout in the army. It just so happened that they needed to be meticulous and cautious. Shea didn't expect that his last-minute decision would actually be correct. On the 4th day, the peace of the journey was broken. It was a rare sunny day. Although it wasn't hot in this season, such a clear and bright sun was enough to raise people's spirits. The group of caravans headed northwest. Most of the terrain of the Wildfire Plains was wilderness and forest. Walking in the wilderness, looking from afar, the surrounding terrain was open. There were only occasional small hills and small patches of sparse forest in the distance. Huoku's men were restrained to follow the group and guard the perimeter. Those impatient young men were somewhat unhappy. Even Huoku couldn't help but urge his horse to run from the front of the group to the back, and from the back to the front. It seemed that he was born to be restless. At noon, in front of the road, Russell brought a few mercenaries and galloped back. Looking from afar, Russell's forehead was covered in sweat. He rushed into the group in one breath and came to Shea's side. When Shea saw that Russell's expression was strange, his heart moved. He vaguely knew that something might have happened. As expected, Russell approached Shea and looked around. He lowered his voice and said, "Sir, I'm afraid something is wrong." "What's wrong?" Shea frowned. Russell took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Sir, please speak softly. The matter isn't clear yet. Don't alarm the group." After saying this, he and Shea galloped to the side of the road. Russell then said in a low voice with a serious expression, "My men split into a few groups and circled around to the left side of the forest. There was also a mountain in front of us to take a look. They felt that something was wrong. In the left side of the forest, there were clearly signs that many groups of horses had been stationed there. The other party was also experienced and had cleaned up the traces. However, my men were meticulous and could still see some traces. The grass in the forest was not neat. It was clear that a large group of horses had passed by and the grass had been gnawed by the horses." Shea frowned. Russell continued, "There's also the hilltop in front. My men went up and searched it. They also saw traces of the grass being tampered with. Moreover, the traces of the grass are all new. It should be a place where a large group of men and horses have been stationed in the past 2 days. I estimated that there were at least 500 of them." After saying that, he pulled out a dagger from his boot and said in a low voice, "I personally checked and dug a few holes in the ground. Sure enough, I found some things. Someone had buried food, bones of wild beasts and even excrement. Clearly, the other party was deliberately hiding their track. I believe that these fellows have been following us for the last 2 days." After saying this, Russell glanced at Hawk, who was beside him. Hawk's face immediately turned red. For the last 2 days, his men had been in charge of patrolling the perimeter. However, they did not find anything. Thus, his men had failed in their duties. Shea nodded. Then, he lowered his voice and shouted, "Sharba." Sharba was originally following behind the group. When he heard Shea's shout, he immediately urged his horse to rush over. Shea's eyes flashed and he said in a low voice, "We are in trouble. Someone might be watching us. You take a few men and run back along the road. Watch for any movements." Sharba was not afraid at all. He grinned and said, "Which bastard dares to target us?" Shea knew that this fellow was brave and fierce. He said seriously, "Don't be careless. We are not in the army now." Only then did Sharba's expression become more cautious. If he had brought an emblem group, no, even if it was only a battalion of Roadrear cavalry, no one would dare to provoke him even if he walked unhindered on the wildfire plains. However, he only had about 100 mercenaries with him now. Although these mercenaries had good fighting skills, in the eyes of an experienced cavalryman like Sharba, they were just a motley crew. If they encountered the Roadrear cavalry, with so few people, a small squad would be enough to defeat them in 2 charges. Search behind us. Don't go too far. If you encounter an enemy, don't act rashly. Come back immediately and pay attention to your safety. Although Sharba was brave and fierce, he was extremely convinced by Shea. After all, Shea had saved his life. After firmly remembering it, he asked Russell for a few people and rode all the way to the back to search for Shea. Once they heard that they might have been watched, Russell and Hawk became very serious. However, Shea's expression was calm. After all, he had been in the army and had seen battles involving tens of thousands of people. Back then, he had dared to charge into Hastings's army with only 200 cavalrymen of different brands. Why would he care about these bandits on the wildfire plains? He didn't even order the group to speed up. Instead, he asked Russell to order the group to move slowly. Then, he found the people from the Gallon Merchant Group who were accompanying the group. These people from the Gallon Merchant Group had been traveling the wildfire plains for many years. Shea asked them for a map. After looking at it for a while, he raised his head and smiled. "Looks like we're right. We've been watched." After saying that, he threw the map on the ground and pointed at it with his dagger. Look, the road ahead happens to be between two forests. There's a long and narrow terrain in between. If they want to ambush us, that's the best place to do so." Hawk and Russell looked at the map and nodded. However, Shea immediately smiled. "These guys are also cunning. Although we've seen through their plan, we have no choice but to take this path." Shea's words made sense. Russell and Hawk didn't look surprised when they heard it. One had to know, what was the greatest difficulty of traveling in the vast wilderness? It wasn't food, but water. It wasn't difficult to bring some food, but it was difficult to bring a large amount of water. Even if the caravan had some water, there were hundreds of people. The people needed to drink and the horses needed to drink. Even if there was some water, it wasn't enough for so many people and horses. Therefore, caravans traveling in the wildfire plains usually had a few fixed routes. They followed a few known water sources and had to adjust to the distribution of the water sources. Sometimes, they didn't even hesitate to take a detour. "We have to move forward and rush to the next water source to replenish the water. Otherwise, even if the people can hold on, the horses won't be able to. If the horses can't hold on, we can't carry these carts ourselves." Shea smiled. "Therefore, we have to pass through this path. We can't go around it. If we go around it, we'll have to walk for 2 more days. If we don't have water for 2 days, our caravan won't be able to move. Once we can't move, the people who are watching us will take the opportunity to attack us. They're most likely a group of mounted bandits. They come and go quickly. If they mount a surprise attack, we can only resist. Maybe we'll be scattered by them." When Russell and Huoku heard this, their expressions became stern. If it was a real fight, the two of them were experienced mercenaries. Naturally, they wouldn't be afraid. But the lack of water wasn't something courage could make up for. The two of them had rich experience surviving in the wilderness. They knew that once the caravan ran out of water, the men and horses would be unable to endure the thirst. Even the most elite caravan would be helpless. In such a vast wasteland, without a water source, they could only be trapped to death by their opponents. "Force our way through." This was Huoku's suggestion. This staunch young man gritted his teeth. Russell muttered to himself for a while and frowned. "Or we can go east and avoid them. We can find a water source to replenish our water. Then, we'll see what happens." This was a steady approach. Shea smiled and looked at the two of them. His eyes flashed and a glimmer of light appeared in his eyes. At this moment, a hint of killing intent flashed through Shea's eyes. After all, he was a man who had experienced war. He had charged out from thousands of men and horses. Once he revealed his true power, Huoku and Russell's hearts trembled. "There's no need for either," Shea sneered. At this moment, there was a hint of coldness in his smile. At this moment, Shea seemed to have regained some of the spirit he had when he led his troops to battle Hastings on the wildfire plains. "We'll continue to move forward slowly," Shea said coldly. "There's no need to rush forward. We'll walk at our current speed and wait for them to attack. Aren't we just sitting and waiting for death?" Huoku sucked in a breath of cold air. Russell glanced at Shea again and said in a low voice, "Huoku, don't be anxious. Sir must have another idea." Shea snorted. "Of course I have an idea. Humph. If we rush through the ambush area, it's not that difficult." When he said this, Huoku and Russell didn't believe him. After all, if they encountered hundreds of mounted bandits in the wilderness, it would be difficult for them to rush through with their walking speed. After all, the carriages couldn't run fast. Moreover, they were at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. Until now, they still didn't know the depth of Shea's personal ability. They also didn't know that this young man in front of them was the famous Shea Thunder who had fought with Hastings in the last great battle. "My idea is to teach these people a lesson for daring to target Lao Tzu." Shea punched the map. The two of them sucked in a breath of cold air. Only the few Lantis warriors standing to the side had received orders from the Chamber of Commerce before they set out. They only needed to listen to Sir Shea's orders. At this moment, their expressions were indifferent. Whatever Shea said, they would do. It's too difficult. Russell shook his head. We're at a disadvantage. We'll be lucky if we can safely rush through. Let's split up. Shea sneered. When these words came out, Huoku and Russell turned pale with fright. Russell. Shea looked at the middle-aged man. You are the most careful when doing things. Take all your men and immediately leave the main group. Go to the west and find a water source. In about 1 day's journey to the west, there will be a water source. Your men will move quickly. I will give you 2 days. I will give you some of the leather bags and horses in the caravan. You have 50 men, and each of you will have 2 horses. It will be enough for you to maintain your speed. Your task is to get the water back. Shea chuckled. We don't have many men to begin with. Those mounted bandits will never expect us to split up. Thus, even if they do keep watch in the surroundings, they will at most send a few scattered group. They definitely won't be able to stop you. Hearing this, Russell's face changed. Sir, once we leave, only Huoku and his men will be left in the caravan. If they attack you, we can block them, Shea smiled proudly, his expression full of disdain. They are just a bunch of bandits and mounted bandits. Humph, Huoku looked deeply at Shea and gritted his teeth. Shea, are you confident? Although he was brave, he was not a fool. After Russell's men left, there were only a few dozen men left in the caravan who could fight. With only a few dozen men and no horses, it would be too difficult for them to block the attack of hundreds of mounted bandits in this wilderness. Shea snorted. Mounted bandits? What a joke. Lao Tzu is from the Rhodian Cavalry Regiment. Playing cavalry with Lao Tzu? Lao Tzu will play them to death. Russell's expression was uncertain. Finally, he gritted his teeth and said, Fine. You are the customer. Since you have made the decision, we will do as you say. However, he hesitated for a moment and stared at Shea. He slowly said, If you can't do it, run to the west. My men will meet you. No need. Shea shook his head. You just need to remember to bring back water in 2 days. Otherwise, even if we win against the mounted bandits, we will die of thirst without water. After saying that, Shea looked at Russell and suddenly smiled. When you come back, we will work together from the inside and outside to give those fellows a taste of their own medicine. At this moment, Russell revealed a decisive look. He immediately stood up and quickly gathered his men. Shea was not careless. He immediately gave up the horses for Russell's men. Russell's men had 50 men, and each of them had 2 horses. He also gave most of the water to Russell's men. The caravan only had enough water for 2 days. Russell did not waste any more words. He immediately led his men and left the caravan, heading to the west. Seeing that Russell had left, Hawk's face was gloomy as he gathered his men to prepare for battle. Then, Lantis men, who had been standing to the side, came forward. One of the leaders from the Gallon's Chamber of Commerce said in a low voice, Lord Shea, that Russell, will he take the opportunity to run away? When Shea heard that, he glanced at the man and said indifferently, If he runs away, then he is seeking his own death. When I return in the future, I will naturally look for him. However, I think that this fellow is very smart. He will not do that. Shea's words were full of confidence. After all, his personal strength was there. If Shea didn't have to worry about bringing such a large caravan, if he were to charge in alone, how could these motley crew of horse thieves stop him? Lantis men smiled. We are not worried at all. Lord Shea is not even afraid of Hastings, let alone small horse bandit. After a while, Sarba returned with his men. Sarba had gone with 6 men, but only 3 of them were left. Other than Sarba, the other 2 mercenaries were injured. One of them had an arrow in his shoulder, and half of the arrow was stuck in his shoulder. When he ran back, he jumped off his horse and fell down. Shea frowned. He saw that Sharba was safe and sound, but his armor was stained with blood. He went up and asked in a low voice, "What happened?" Sharba shook his head. After he got off his horse, he took a deep breath and sneered. Our escape route has been cut off. Damn it, we had not gone far when the forest we passed through this morning was already occupied. Before we could even get close to the forest, the other party's caravan had already charged out. We were almost surrounded. We lost 2 men before we managed to escape. However, we did not let the other party take advantage of us. Lao Tzu cut off 4 heads. After he finished speaking, Sharba spat and said disdainfully, "These fellows are chattering like a mob. They are far inferior to Odin's reindeer cavalry. If they were from our Rodrier regiment, give me a small squad and I would be able to crush those fellows." After a pause, Sharba lowered his voice and said with a frown, "Shea, these mercenaries' combat skills are not bad. However, their combat skills on horseback are too weak. We lost 2 men and were knocked off their horses in just one exchange. I think it will be difficult to rely on these people to crush the other party." Shea smiled and did not say anything. He then asked Sharba for more details. Sharba was after all an old cavalry soldier in the army. He was very experienced. An old cavalry soldier like him had worked as a scout in his early years. He knew that he had to pay attention to the details. He quickly reported what he had observed. There were at least 300 people blocking their escape route. They were all mounted bandits. Moreover, according to Sharba's evaluation, these mounted bandits' equestrian skills were not bad. If they were to fight on horseback, these mercenaries would definitely not be a match for them. After all, in a cavalry battle, what was tested was not one's combat skills, but the excellence of one's equestrian skills. Moreover, Sharba also said that there were at least 3 groups of mounted bandits blocking their escape route. They were all under different banners. When Hawk heard this news, his eyes immediately widened. "Damn! It seems that we have been targeted by a pack of hungry wolves." Although there were many bandit groups on the wildfire steppes, generally speaking, these bandit groups were not large in scale. Generally speaking, a bandit group with a few hundred members was considered a large group. In a group with a few hundred members, excluding the old, weak, women, and children, it would be considered not bad if there were dozens of warriors. There were actually 3 banners behind them. It was obvious that 3 different bandit groups had joined forces. What a big move! There are already 3 groups blocking our escape route. This time, I'm afraid that the number of people who have joined forces to attack us is not small. Shea chuckled coldly. He suddenly glanced at Hawk and asked, "What do you think?" Hawk's expression changed. He thought for a moment and suddenly realized something. He cursed loudly, "Damn! It's those bastards from the Cossacks. Those guys were originally mounted bandit. This time, you didn't hire them, so they simply came to eat us. Our group has quite a number of people. Those Cossacks must have contacted a few of the black gangs on the wildfire steppe. This time, we are facing a pack of hungry wolves." Shea nodded. "There are already 300 people blocking our escape route. Then there are at least 500 waiting for us in front. They actually send out so many people. Do they think that Lao Tzu is a fat sheep?" Shea was right. He had spent a lot of gold coins in Wildfire Town and offered 300 gold coins to hire mercenaries as guards. According to the usual practice of merchant groups, if they could see that the price tag was 300 gold coins to hire guards, then normally speaking, the value of the goods they were carrying would be at least 10 times higher. Otherwise, wouldn't this business deal be a huge loss? However, those fellows didn't expect that Shea wasn't carrying any precious goods. These carriages were only filled with ordinary grain that wasn't worth much money. However, these mounted bandits didn't expect that someone would do such a loss-making business. Although Xiao was buying food in Wildfire Town, when the mounted bandits received the news, they also thought that the other party had deliberately set up a diversion. Perhaps he had secretly brought some precious treasure with him in the caravan. Carrying precious treasures and using ordinary goods to deceive others was a common tactic used by merchants. Those mounted bandits only thought that Shea was doing the same. This time, with such a fat sheep passing through and with the Cossacks acting as a contact, he actually managed to unite 7 to 8 groups of mounted bandits with considerable strength around the wildfire steppes. These 7 to 8 groups of mounted bandits had a population of close to 10,000. If they were to turn out in full force, they would be able to gather up to 1,000 cavalry. And the other party's plan was very clear. With such a fat sheep, if they could eat up Shea, then the goods that Shea was carrying would be worth at least several thousand or even tens of thousands of gold coins. If they were to snatch back such a large sum of money, it would be equivalent to 2 years of profit for these 7 to 8 groups of mounted bandits. After hearing Sharba's report, although Hawk and the others were brave, they still paled when they heard the number of enemies. After all, they only had a few dozen people on their side. To resist the attack of hundreds to thousands of mounted bandits, what are you afraid of? Shea sneered. The caravan will continue forward. These fellows won't attack us for now. They will wait until we reach the ambush location. There's no need to speed up. Let's just walk slowly. Hawk was a little puzzled. With anxiety in his heart, he asked Shea for advice. Shea had a good impression of this young and staunch man, so he explained, "We are a large group of people and horses, and the caravan is moving slowly. If we panic and run around like a swarm of bees, I'm afraid that after the chaos, the other party will take the opportunity to attack. When that time comes, hundreds of mounted bandits will rush forward and we won't be able to resist. It's better to walk slowly. The other party won't attack for the time being and will wait for us to enter their ambush location. This is called driving a sheep into a wolf's den." After a pause, the country bumpkin grinned and a sinister smile appeared on his face. "But this pack of wolves won't think that what they're driving into their den is not a fat sheep, but a fierce tiger." Under Shea's orders, the caravan moved even more slowly. The group maintained a tight formation, one carriage in front of another, and moved extremely close together. The mounted bandits at the rear became more and more unscrupulous and secretly caught up from behind. Since they had already met with Sharba, the mounted bandits knew that they had exposed their tracks, so they didn't bother to hide their tracks. Hundreds of riders followed far behind, as if they were escorting the caravan. Standing in the caravan and looking back, one could see a dense shadow on the distant horizon of the wilderness. The mounted bandits were very patient. They drove the caravan from behind, waiting for the caravan to enter the ambush location. They were not in a hurry to attack. Firstly, there were companions waiting at the ambush location. Everyone gathered together, so they had more confidence in attacking. Secondly, they weren't worried that this fat sheep would run away. On the vast wildfire plains, dozens of large caravans moved slowly. How could they compare to the speed of the mounted bandits, who came and went like the wind? Finally, in the afternoon, 2 long stretches of forest appeared in front of them. The terrain on both sides gradually rose. The forest covered the sloping ground, and the caravan was obviously unable to move. There was only a flat terrain that was only a few hundred meters wide in the middle of the 2 sloping ground that they could pass through. Arriving here, Shea suddenly ordered, "Everyone stop." Then he calmly ordered dozens of large caravans to surround and form a circle on the spot. 50 large caravans formed a circle, and the tall carriages and carriages were connected together. Suddenly, it was like a circular city defense, protecting the caravan of more than 200 people in the middle. The mounted bandits at the back seemed a little surprised. Seeing that this fat sheep had been driven to the entrance of the wolf's den, they suddenly formed a turtle formation in the wilderness. "Distribute the weapons," Shea took advantage of the fact that the mounted bandits hadn't reacted and immediately gathered everyone. The accompanying caravan, the coachman, and the coachman were all from the Gallants' Chamber of Commerce. These people in the caravan that belonged to the Gallants' Chamber of Commerce appeared to be very disciplined. There wasn't any chaos, and they were rather calm. Moreover, these caravans had been traveling in the wilderness for many years, so the coachman and coachman were used to this kind of situation. Although many of them were panicking, they were still generally considered calm. Shea directly ordered the Fire Rhino Corps and the Lantis warriors to distribute some weapons to the coachman and coachman. He selected dozens of strong and simple people to arm. At least each of them had a sword in their hands. This was enough. The Lantis were excellent archers, so Shea simply used them as archers. 30 Lantis warriors gave up their close combat weapons, leaving only their bows and arrows, and set up a defense in the innermost part of the circular defensive line. On the other hand, the Fire Rhino Corps warriors brought 50 armed coachmen and coachmen to the inner part of the defensive line formed by the carriages. Shea didn't completely block the circular defensive line, but deliberately left a small gap. The gap wasn't big, only about 3 to 4 meters wide. In such a narrow passage, as long as there was a fierce general like Shea blocking there, even if there were hundreds of people, it would be difficult to rush in. After Shea finished setting up the formation, the people below were somewhat at a loss. Even Hua Ku didn't understand Shea's intentions. What was the use of setting up this tortoise formation in the wilderness? Although this circular defensive formation was most suitable to resist the charge of the mounted bandits, their side was originally short of water, and the mounted bandits weren't idiots. If they just waited outside and didn't attack, wouldn't it be terrible for them to exhaust them to death? They won't. Shea's expression was calm and his eyes calmed down. At this moment, his body naturally emitted a calm and murderous aura. He glanced at Huaku and sneered. Those mounted bandits will take the initiative to attack us. We can't afford to waste time, and they can't afford to waste time either. Why? Shea smiled. With so many mounted bandits, even if each of them can carry a few water pouches, they can't possibly carry rations with them, right? The other side has at least a few hundred people, and they can't possibly carry a lot of rations with them. Lao Tzu was once a cavalryman. Even the elite cavalrymen in the army can only guarantee 3 days of fighting strength. If the time is any longer, there is no way to guarantee the cavalrymen's fighting strength. Even though the people eat little, the horses eat a lot. A horse needs at least 20 jin of fodder a day. If they don't bring any fodder and only let the horses eat wild grass, at most 2 days, the horses won't have the strength to run. The horses need to carry a lot of fodder. If they waste a day, they will run out of food first. I don't believe that these mounted bandits would carry dozens of jin of rations with them when they come out to rob us. Shea pointed at his carriage. We have enough rations. Dozens of carriages of rations, we can consume more than them. Therefore, they will definitely attack first. Sure enough, the moment Shea's voice fell, the mounted bandits hiding in the forest in front of them couldn't wait any longer. After a series of whistles, a large number of mounted bandits rushed out from the forest on both sides. These mounted bandits appeared in a chaotic swarm from the forest on both sides like a swarm of bees. Instantly, countless startled birds flew into the sky above the forest. Seeing the groups of mounted bandits running out from the forest, even though it was chaotic, but looking from afar, the number of mounted bandits was beyond the expectations of Shea and the others. Even Sharba, who was standing on the carriage and looking into the distance, couldn't help but curse. Damn it! So many! I'm afraid there are 700 to 800 riders. The number of mounted bandits in the ambush in front and the ones behind to cut off their path of retreat had already exceeded 1,000. Although these mounted bandits appeared chaotic, it was obvious that they had different banners. It was likely that they had more than 10 banners that belonged to more than 10 different mountains. Moreover, although the mounts of these mounted bandits were called mounted bandits, they were still far inferior to the cavalry of the army. Only a small number of the mounted bandits were elite. Their mounts were of good quality. However, war horses were very expensive, and these mounted bandits were naturally unable to afford them. For most of the mounted bandits, it was already good enough for them to be given an inferior horse to ride on. The equipment of these bandits were also different, with a mix of good and bad. Some of the mounted bandits were wearing the leather armor of the Byzantine Empire's army. However, the styles were also different. Some of them wore the uniform of the standing army, while others wore the uniform of the local garrison army. What was even more ridiculous was that some of the mounted bandits had obtained the leather armor of infantry from who knows where and wore it messily on their bodies. They could be considered elite. Most of the mounted bandits did not have the financial resources to equip themselves with armor. Many of the mounted bandits wore thick cotton robes. Those cotton robes were soaked in oil and were quite tough. They also possessed a certain level of defense. Their weapons were also modeled. Some used spears, some used swords, and some used swords. For most of the mounted bandits, it was already good enough for them to be given a wooden handle spear. As for defense, only a small number of mounted bandits were equipped with shield. Moreover, most of them were wooden shields. As for the archers, they belonged to the technical branch, and there were not many of them. Seeing that the other party did not have any archers, Shea's heart calmed down. The other party saw that Shea's group had set up a formation of carriages. Although the defense of this turtle formation was not bad, it had also blocked their own path. The mounted bandits were fearless, and the two groups quickly gathered together. Looking from afar, one could see thousands of mounted bandits joining together. Although it was still chaotic, people were shouting and horses were neighing. Thousands of animals were running back and forth in the wilderness. The mounted bandits were constantly whistling and shouting, making threatening noises to frighten the people inside. Suddenly, the wilderness was trampled by the hooves of the horses. In just a moment, thousands of mounted bandits had gathered together. The momentum was very shocking. Rolling yellow soil could be seen as a large group of mounted bandits gallop. The sound of the horses' hooves was as dense as the muffled thunder of summer. Everyone in the carriage, including the warriors of the Fire Rhino mercenary group, had at most seen tens of hundreds of people fighting. When had they ever seen such a scene of thousands of soldiers and horses? In an instant, everyone's expression changed. Even Hawk's face had turned ashen. Shea looked at the people around him and shook his head inwardly. This will not do. The other party is admittedly a motley crew. Lao Tzu's men are also not elites. The other party has more people and a stronger force. If this goes on, we will lose our morale before the battle even begins. After making up his mind, he suddenly ran over with large strides and hacked open a long box that was placed in the carriage. Inside the chest was a set of armor and 2 long war horse weapons. These were the good items he had obtained from the Imperial Palace's armory back in the Imperial capital. Shea picked up a mace and threw a halberd to Sharba. Then, he mounted his horse and laughed maniacally. Sergeant Sharba. Sharba, who was standing on top of the carriage, suddenly heard Shea calling out using the military term. Instinctively, he straightened his body and shouted, "Sergeant Sharba is here. The enemy is provoking us. What should we, the Rodrier people, do?" Sharba's face instantly revealed a ferocious expression. "Kill." "Good." Shea laughed maniacally. His laughter instantly drowned out the clamor of over 1,000 mounted bandits. He stood upright with his back straight as though he was praising himself. His eyebrows twitched and his eyes flashed like lightning. Then, he shouted loudly, "Cavalry, hear my order! Put on the armor!" Sharba shouted loudly and jumped down from the carriage. He quickly ran to the side and put on the armor of Mount Hill. Originally, the armor of Mount Hill was heavy. Even for a cavalry soldier, it would require the help of a squire. Fortunately, there was still Todoro, who was used to being Shea's squire. Todoro ran out from the group and helped Sharba put on the armor of Mount Hill. Sharba laughed and mounted his horse. Grabbing the heavy halberd, he slammed his fist on the chest of the armor of Mount Hill and shouted proudly, "Captain, the Rhodian cavalry regiment's personal guards have been assembled." Although there were only 2 of them, Shea and Sharba's faces were filled with arrogance. One shouted and the other replied with an imposing manner akin to that of a magnificent army with thousands of men and horses. It was as though the 2 of them weren't here, but rather the renowned Rhodian cavalry regiment. "Get on your horse. Charge with me." After Shea mounted his horse, Sharba had already urged his horse to Shea's side. The 2 of them stood side by side. Glancing at each other, they smiled proudly. As soon as Huoku heard Shea say "charge," his expression immediately changed, and he shouted loudly, "Sir! You can't. There are over 1,000 of them." At this moment, Shea didn't even pay attention to Huoku. He kicked the horse's belly and the horse took 2 steps forward. Suddenly, he shouted loudly, "Rhodian!" Behind him, Sharba's face was filled with excitement. His eyes seemed to have turned red. Immediately, he gathered all his strength and shouted, "Advance!" Like a whirlwind, the 2 of them charged out of the gap in the carriage formation. Although there were only 2 people and 2 mounts, there was a violent aura of bravery, especially when they shouted, "Rhodian, advance!" The moment the slogan was shouted out, even the mercenaries beside them couldn't help but feel their blood boiling with excitement despite their shock. Shea and Sharba charged out of the formation on 2 mounts. Immediately, the 2 of them crouched down on the backs of their horses. In the standard cavalry charging posture, the 2 of them rolled out. Their iron hooves clattered and their armor emitted a dense chill under the sunlight. Although there were only 2 mounts, they were closely aligned together. They maintained the standard cavalry charging formation. In front of them, there were over 1,000 mounted bandits like a black cloud. However, the 2 of them turned a blind eye to it. Instead, they viciously charged into the 1,000 mounted bandit. Hawk, who was behind, was first stunned. Then, as though he suddenly woke up, his face seemed to have been slashed by a knife. He abruptly jumped up and flew up to the roof of the carriage. His eyes widened as he stared at the 2 lone mounts. With a heaven-shaking aura, they viciously charged into the 1,000 mounted bandits. Hawk's face was flushed red. Even the muscles at the corners of his eyes were trembling. His entire body was trembling with excitement. 1 rider against 1,000. Damn it! This is the legendary 1 rider against 1,000. Rhodian cavalry! Boom! Seeing the 2 lone mounts charging into the 1,000 mounted bandits, the black cloud of mounted bandits instantly swallowed up the figures of Shea and Sharba. The 2 of them were like sharp needles piercing into the enemy's formation. In an instant, they disappeared without a trace. From afar, the mounted bandits' battle cries shook the heavens. Wherever they looked, men and horses would be thrown off their feet. The few mounted bandits that were in front of Shea were directly broken through by Shea's single mount. Before the mounted bandits could even meet him, they were directly defeated. Sharba, who was behind Shea, swept out with his long halberd. Instantly, flesh and blood splattered everywhere. The blood-red waves were quickly covered by the sky full of dust. Shea's 2 mounts were like a stone thrown into a river. After stirring up some waves, they disappeared. Hawk's heart thumped wildly like a drum. All the blood in his body seemed to have rushed to his head. His face and ears turned red. Suddenly, a sense of shame rose up in his heart. He had always thought of himself as brave. However, when Shea's 2 mounts charged into the enemy's formation, where would he find the courage to do so? Seeing that Shea's figure had disappeared, Hawk grew anxious. Suddenly, A hand reached out from beside him and pressed down on his shoulder. Turning around, he saw that it was Shea's subordinate, Philip. "He will be fine." There was a complicated expression on Philip's face. Moments later, a sudden commotion could be heard coming from the mounted bandit. From afar, one of the mounted bandit banners could be seen falling down. Then, with that spot as the center, the mounted bandits suddenly scattered in all directions. Amidst the chaos, 2 mounts suddenly charged out from the crowd. Everywhere they went, there were waves of blood. Shea rode in front, his entire body stained with blood. One of his hands held onto a mace while the other held onto a bloody human head. Sharba followed behind him. His hair and beard were stained with blood. Even his originally bright armor was scarlet red. The 2 of them charged out of the mounted bandits' formation. Seeing that they had run for more than 10 steps, the mounted bandits behind them noisily chased after them. Shea suddenly roared loudly. Unexpectedly, he didn't run back directly. Instead, he suddenly turned his horse to the side. Turning around, he once again charged towards the dozens of mounted bandits chasing after them. His mace swept out and instantly, 3 to 5 mounted bandits were sent flying off their horses. Broken limbs and broken branches scattered everywhere. Shea was like a ferocious tiger as he charged into the enemy's formation. This time, the tens of mounted bandits who were chasing after him suddenly let out a shout. Then, like a swarm of bees, they dispersed. Shea once again charged into the ranks of the mounted bandit. This time it was chaos again. Everywhere he went, waves of people rolled to the side. Seeing that he and Sharba were invincible, they ruthlessly crashed into the ranks of the mounted bandits. This time, another mounted bandit flag was quickly toppled. Shouts of killing filled the air. Moments later, Shea charged out from the other side of the mounted bandits' formation. This time, many parts of his armor had been cut open. Some pieces of flesh and limbs hung on his body. His murderous aura was like that of a god of death. The 2 riders charged out of the mounted bandits' formation. This time, although there were many mounted bandits, none of them dared to chase after them. Shea and Sharba galloped back. After charging into the formation of carriages, they stopped their horses and threw their mace to the ground. Then, they wiped the blood off their faces and laughed wildly. Satisfying. Then, they turned to look at Sharba. "How is it?" Sharba was gasping for breath. However, his back remained straight. Only, he had suffered some injuries. The shoulder armor on his shoulder had been cut open and his thigh had been pierced. Sharba dismounted from his horse. Although he was injured, he wiped the blood off his face. He raised an eyebrow and laughed wildly. Satisfying. Only, these fellows are too weak. Not satisfying enough. Shea laughed and dismounted. Then, he removed a bloody head from the saddle and threw it on the ground. Hawk stepped forward to take a look. The head belonged to none other than the leader of the Cossack mercenary group. "Since I met him in the formation, I killed him." Shea smiled proudly. However, when his gaze swept over, Hawk's body trembled. Although he was brave, he felt as though he was being suppressed by Shea's aura. He did not dare to look straight into Shea's eyes. At this moment, Shea's entire body was stained with blood. His armor was covered with bloody chunks of flesh. His appearance shocked everyone present. Not long after, there was a thunderous cheer. With such a valiant god of death on their side, why should they be afraid of some small mounted bandits? After Shea killed 2 of the mounted bandits in the distance, they were thrown into chaos. It took them a full 2 hours to reorganize themselves. The mounted bandits' aura had clearly weakened. Although they were still shouting and threatening loudly, their aura was clearly not as strong as before. Seeing that the sun was setting in the west, 7 or 8 mounted bandits suddenly charged out from the mounted bandit. The leader was a man with a strong stature and a fierce face. He had a bald head and a fierce face. He held a long axe in his hand and wore iron armor on his chest. Clearly, he was the leader of the mounted bandit. These 7 or 8 mounted bandits rushed to the front of the formation and dared not approach. The bald man in the lead shouted loudly, "That fellow from the day, come out and face your death. You killed my brother. Lao Tzu is here to take your life." At this moment, Shea was resting under the carriage. He had not changed out of his blood-stained armor. His entire body reeked of blood. Seeing him like this, even Huaku, who had been on good terms with him for the past few days, was in awe and did not dare to approach him. When Shea heard the exchange outside, he raised his head and grinned. He immediately mounted his horse and ran to the front of the formation. Although the bald man was fierce, when he saw Shea running out and saw that Shea was covered in blood, his aura weakened. However, he immediately gathered his anger and shouted, "It's you! Do you dare to fight with Lao Tzu for 300 blows?" Shea laughed wildly. Without saying anything, he suddenly kicked the horse's belly and charged forward. That fierce bald man was still shouting when Shea rushed in front of him. He hurriedly raised his axe and chopped down. Shea casually blocked with the mace in his hand. Kung! The axe flew out of the bald man's hand. The bald man cried out in pain, and a cracking sound came from his arm. Clearly, Shea's monstrous strength had not only caused his weapon to fly out of his hand, but even his bones were broken. Shea rushed in front of him and smashed down with his hammer, smashing his bald head into a pulp. Then, he coldly looked at the bandits beside him and suddenly grinned. The bandits' faces turned ashen. They shouted and turned around to run back. Shea pushed the bandit's physical body down from the horse's back. Shea stood on his horse and shouted towards the mounted gangster team opposite him. "Who else doesn't want to live?" he shouted. After all, there were fierce people among the horse bandits. Immediately, a horse bandit leader rushed out with a few trusted aides. The person who came rushed over on his horse while shouting madly. Shea's face was indifferent. Suddenly, he rode on the horse and took out the howling bow. He flipped his hand and took out an iron spine armor-piercing arrow. With a whoosh, the arrow shot out and suddenly there was a red light. The mounted gangster leader who was running was directly hit by the red light and flew out from the horse's back. While he was still in midair, the upper half of his body had already exploded, turning into a pile of minced meat. Half of his body fell to the ground. The rest of the people were shocked and turned their horses around to run back. Shea stood there with the longbow in his hand. He deliberately laughed and proudly rode his horse back and forth in front of the enemy's formation. Then, he slowly went back. There were thousands of mounted gangsters, but no one dared to chase after him. In the formation of carriages, Hawk stood in the carriage with a pair of red eyes and looked at Shea's figure outside. He suddenly punched the carriage and said fiercely, "One man can stop thousands. So a fierce general who can stop thousands really exists. Damn, Lao Tzu thinks of himself as a hero. This is the real hero." Shea ran back to the chariot formation and dismounted from the horse. Suddenly, a figure rushed over from the side and knelt in front of Shea with a plop. Hoka's face was full of fanaticism and his eyes were red. He clenched his teeth and pulled out the short sword he was wearing. He cut his thumb with the sword and then wiped his forehead, leaving a trace of blood. Many of the mercenaries who saw this could not help but be shocked. This was clearly the highest form of etiquette on the wildfire plains to submit to someone. If Shea was willing to wipe the blood from the other party's forehead, it meant that he was willing to accept the other party's allegiance. "Leader! Hawk!" many people exclaimed. Hawk turned his head and glared fiercely at those people. Then he turned his head. This young man stared at Shea with wide eyes. His eyes flashed with eagerness and fanaticism. Shea's expression was grave and stern as he condescendingly looked down at Huaku. Then, the corners of his mouth revealed a dignified smile. He walked over and gently stretched out his hand, gently wiping Huaku's forehead. Hawk's eyes revealed a fervent look, as if he was finally relieved. When he stood up, his expression was much more respectful. "Sir, you are so brave and fierce. You are definitely not an ordinary person in the army. Please tell me your true identity, and let me know which hero I, Huoku, have submitted to." Shea didn't speak, but Sharba on the side suddenly laughed. "Him? He is Shea Thunder. In the last war, he personally killed Prince Odin, and the one who led 1,000 remnant troops to fight Hastings's tens of thousands of cavalry is him. If you are happy, then vote. Dance until I vomit blood and beg for votes." To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 189. Geoar Chapter 178. Chop Motherf * Curs. Russell's face was drenched in sweat from running. Even though it was early spring and the sun was not scorching, after running for half a day on horseback, Russell was still panting from exhaustion. More importantly, the exhaustion of his body was secondary. At this moment, Russell's heart felt as though a ball of flame had ignited within it. He had led his men out to search for water. Just what was that Sir planning? Based on Russell's rich experience, he could faintly feel that this ambush was not an ordinary one. To dare attack such a large group of horse bandits, those horse bandits had always been sensitive to information. They might even have spies in Wildfire Town. Knowing that there were 2 large mercenary corps protecting them, they still dared to attack. Thinking about it, Hawk and the others must be in deep trouble. After he led his men away, would the remaining men be able to resist the horse bandits' attack? Where did that Sir's confidence come from? Get water, get water. Damn it. Even if we get water, what use would it be if our group is defeated by the horse bandits? For a moment, Russell felt that he must have gone mad. To actually believe in that ridiculously young Sir. I must have gone mad. That kid is even younger than Hawk. How much could he know? That kind of blind arrogance. He might have already been defeated by the horse bandits. My men running back and forth to find water is simply a waste of energy. But then, he thought about it again. When that young Sir made his decision, his expression was calm and resolute. During the last battle with Odin's men, Russell had seen the Byzantine army passing by Wildfire Town. Those Byzantium's elite standing corps, those high-ranking officers, had such a mysterious aura. They were full of vigor and at the same time, contained a hidden power. Judging by that Sir's appearance, he did not appear to be frivolous or arrogant. Could it be he really had a way to stop the horse bandits' attack? With only a few dozen men, against 10 times the number of horse bandits, for a moment, Russell could not help but think, I might as well just take my men and run away. At any rate, before setting out from Wildfire Town, that young Sir had already given him half of the reward. Additionally, each of his men had 2 horses. With such conditions, they could just take the southwest route and circle back to Wildfire Town. Relying on the mobility of 2 horses, they would definitely be able to escape the horse bandits' encirclement. This was almost certain. Run or not run. Russell's mind was constantly weighing the pros and cons. If he ran, he would have already received the money and 50 horses. That was a big profit. But if he did that, he would be too cowardly. However, if he didn't run, even if he found the water and ran back, he would still be courting death. Seeing that the sun was setting, Russell suddenly shouted from his horse, "Stop!" With his shout, the 50 mercenaries immediately reined in their horses and stopped. At this moment, everyone was sweating profusely. Someone asked, "Leader, what's wrong? Do you want to rest? Change horses?" Russell's face was gloomy. He had wanted to say, "Turn around," but when the words reached his mouth, the pride and principles in his heart did not allow him to do so. Finally, he sighed in his heart, Forget it, I'll accompany that young sir in his madness for once. If worse comes to worst, when we return and they've already been defeated, it won't be too late for me to take my men and run. I have 2 horses here anyway. If we really want to run, it's not like we can't escape. Change horses, change horses! The mercenaries all shouted loudly. Then, they all jumped off their horses and changed into the prepared horses. These mercenaries were all quite tired. After all, they were not cavalry nor horse bandits. Although they could ride horses, their horsemanship skills were too lacking. They could only barely gallop on the horse. As for some advanced horsemanship skills, such as how to appreciate the horse's power and how to conserve energy, they were all completely clueless. Once the mercenaries started galloping, they would wrap their hands around the horse's neck. In the end, before they died of exhaustion, the horse almost died of exhaustion. But any cavalry with excellent horsemanship would know how to conserve energy to the greatest extent when traveling long distances. These mercenaries were all tensed up and their legs tightly clamped onto the horse's belly. Their energy was greatly depleted. After running for half a day, they were all so tired that they were about to collapse. Even though they had changed horses, their speed had slowed down. Fortunately, what made Russell feel a little relieved was that on the way to the west, they did not see any horse bandits blocking the way. Obviously, those horse bandits did not think that they would dare to split up. There was indeed a water source in the west, but it was too far away from the main group. Even if horses galloped, it would take 2 days to get there. If the main group moved slowly, it would probably take 6 or 7 days. So the horse bandits were not afraid that the main group would change their route at the last minute. Russell was anxious and kept urging his men to speed up. But these mercenaries were after all not proficient in horsemanship. No matter how Russell urged them, they could not speed up. After traveling for a while, one of his men could not help but complain, "Leader, we really can't run anymore. Let's stop and rest." Russell's face was gloomy as he shouted, "Nonsense. You guys have been idling for too long recently. Even your bones have become lazy. Can't you even take this bit of hardship?" In fact, he was also quite tired. Although his martial arts were not ordinary, he was after all over 40 years old. His physical strength was not as good as before, and he was not good at riding. After running all the way, his legs were sore and painful, especially his inner thighs. After rubbing against the saddle for an entire afternoon, they were already burning with pain. His body on the horse's back was bouncing so much that it was about to fall apart. But as the leader, he had to set an example. Otherwise, even he would complain about it, let alone restrain his men. Seeing the leader berate them, his men complained, "Leader, it's not that we are lazy. We have followed you everywhere and suffered all kinds of hardships. It's just that we are not cavalry. We have already risked our lives to run this far on horseback. If we continue to run, both men and horses will not be able to take it. Let's stop and rest." Russell looked and saw that many of his men were on the verge of collapsing on horseback. It was just that he was usually strict with his men, so no one dared to fall behind and rest. At this moment, many of his men were pale. It was obvious that they had run out of strength. Moreover, many of the horses were foaming at the mouth. "All right." Russell gritted his teeth and helplessly gave the order. But his heart was still unwilling. He suddenly raised his head and looked into the distance. He saw that in the distant horizon, he could faintly see a small hill covered by a forest. Russell's heart skipped a beat and he shouted, "Good! Run to the forest in front and stop to start a fire to eat. Everyone, put in more effort and we will be there soon." With such encouragement, he finally urged his subordinates to run a little further. The hill in the distance did not seem far, but there was a saying, "Looking at a mountain is close enough to kill a horse." Looking at the hill that did not seem far, they ran for a full hour before they reached it. Once they reached the edge of the forest, without waiting for Russell's order, all the men dismounted from their horses. Some even threw themselves on the ground, and did not even tie up their horses. They wished that they could just lie on the ground and not get up. Russell was furious. He waved his whip a few times and urged his men to reluctantly get up and lead the horses. Only then did he slowly enter the forest. He did not go too deep, and only stopped at the edge of the forest. He then assigned men to dig holes, pick up branches, and start a fire. Russell walked to the side and leaned against a large tree. Naturally, his trusted subordinates brought him food. He ate a few mouthfuls and lost his appetite. Instead, he took out a water skin and drank half of it in one go. Only then did he feel the burning sensation in his heart subside a little. He let out a long sigh and looked at his tired subordinates who were lying all over the place. His heart was filled with worry. When he was resting, Russell flipped open his pants and saw that his inner thigh was already covered in blisters. The blisters had already burst, and fresh blood had stuck to his pant. He gently tugged at them, and the pain made him grimace. He sighed. After all, he and his men had always been escorting merchant caravans on foot. Their ability to ride horses was too sloppy. After all, horses were expensive equipment. The cost of feeding a horse that wasn't too good, not counting the war horses that had been trained, was enough to feed 3 or 4 strong men. Mercenary groups like them earned money through hard work. How would they have the extra money to equip horses? The horses that they used before this trip were all borrowed from the Gallant's Chamber of Commerce by Shea. Luo Su rested for a while to catch his breath and recover some of his spirit. He habitually looked around vigilantly. His subordinates were all exhausted. Moreover, they had already run far away and did not have to worry about being ambushed by the horse bandit. Therefore, when everyone stopped to rest, they were so tired that they almost collapsed. They did not even bother to send people to search the surroundings. Although Luo Su wanted to urge them to send people to search the surroundings, he could not bear to do so when he saw that his subordinates were all on the verge of collapsing. "Forget it, I'll just slack off this time. Nothing bad will happen." But at this moment, when he raised his head and looked around, the forest was gloomy. Although it seemed quiet, Russell's vigilance, which had been cultivated through many years of mercenary life, immediately felt that something was wrong. This vigilance in his heart was not an inexplicable feeling. Russell was very clear that this vigilance had saved his life countless times. He must have instinctively felt that something was wrong. But at this moment, he was both physically and mentally exhausted. For a moment, he could not figure out what was wrong. But the instincts that had been cultivated over the years had already reminded him. Thinking of this, Russell forced himself to stand up. Holding onto a tree, he squinted his eyes and looked around the forest. His heart raced. Instantly his face changed. Not right. Not right. Such a large forest. Naturally there would be many birds resting in the forest. But with such a large group of people running in, with people shouting and horses neighing, if this was a normal forest, there should have been a large number of birds flying in alarm. But he and his men had been here for half a day. Where did they see any birds? Then the only explanation was, the birds in the forest had already flown away before they arrived. As for why it flew away, naturally, it was because there were already many people who had come here long before them, and those people were probably in the forest at this moment. The more Russell thought about it, the clearer his thoughts became. His face changed greatly and he suddenly pulled out his sword. He shouted loudly, "Everyone get up! Get into formation!" Before he could shout too late, he suddenly heard a whistling sound from the forest. The whistling sound came from 3 directions at the same time. Then, he heard the sound of horse hooves galloping over. From several directions in the forest, the shadows of dozens of riders quickly rushed out from the forest. These riders who were hiding in the forest had excellent riding skills. Although the forest was not too dense, the gaps between the trees were not too wide. But the hundreds of riders that rushed out from the forest quickly rushed through the gaps between the trees. They were as agile as monkeys. Obviously, they were all elites with excellent horsemanship. Hundreds of riders galloped through the forest at lightning speed. However, it was as if they were running on a flat plain. Their speed did not slow down in the slightest. Before Russell's words were too late, the rider who was running at the front was already right under everyone's eyelids. At this moment, the sky had already darkened. Seeing the dozens of riders galloping out from the forest, they were like ghosts. When they rushed up, they could only hear the sound of horse hooves. No one shouted or neighed. These fellows were like ghosts pouncing on their faces. In the darkness of the night, they were simply eerie. The mercenaries were instantly alarmed. Many of them rolled and crawled up. Some even scrambled to grab their weapons. But these riders quickly rushed into the mercenaries' group. Very quickly, they cut through the mercenaries and cut them into pieces. The riders on the horses gently bent their waists. Without any weapons in their hands, they quickly knocked down mercenaries one by one. There were even riders who rushed over. 2 riders were side by side. Then, they quickly spread out and threw out a large net. In an instant, 3 to 5 mercenaries were caught in the net. Coupled with the strength of the horses, the mercenaries collapsed. In a short moment, Russell was horrified to discover that his 50 mercenaries were all defeated by the other party. The other party didn't seem to have any killing intent. Instead, those guys on horseback threw out a fishnet-like thing, and all of them became fish in the net. Immediately, they were thrown off their horses. The other party used the momentum of the horses to pull the net, and all of them were caught in the net. Russell's liver and guts were torn apart. His heart was filled with fear and anger. He frantically pulled out his sword and rushed out. With a loud roar, he slashed at the riders passing by. However, these riders seemed to be very cunning. Knowing that he was the leader, they rode back and forth. However, they did not fight him head-on. Instead, they threw out nets from afar. Russell's long sword vibrated and immediately cut through the nets. He roared loudly. However, the riders turned their horses around and ran away. They did not dare to fight him head-on. At this moment, Russell had clearly seen the appearances of these riders. His heart turned cold. These riders were not uniformly dressed. Some wore cotton robes, some wore leather jackets, and some wore leather breastplates. Such attire, they were the standard horse bandits. They were still ambushed by these horse bandits. Seeing his men being beaten down and unable to break free from the nets, there was no doubt that this was the end for them all. Russell's hands and feet turned cold. His heart was filled with despair. He could not help but let out a sorrowful roar. Raising his sword, he charged forward. He had already decided to put his life on the line. Seeing him charging forward, the riders quickly pushed him far away. Their movements were quick and agile. From afar, he could hear the mocking laughter of one of the riders. "Don't be hasty, don't be hasty. You are left for our little leader." Just as those words were spoken, a vigorous voice could be heard coming from the forest. "You are the leader. Let me meet you." Just as those words were spoken, a majestic figure ran out from the forest. Borrowing the faint light, Russell was barely able to make out the newcomer. When he saw the other party's figure, he was stunned. The person who came was extremely majestic. He was even taller than Hawk from the Fire Rhinoceros Regiment that he knew. His long hair was loose and wild, and he held a two-handed heavy sword in his hand. His body was covered in armor, but his face was covered with an iron mask that covered his face. When this majestic figure charged forward, Russell immediately felt a gust of wind. The heavy broadsword in the other party's hand hacked down toward his head. Russell gritted his teeth and raised his sword to block. A cring sound rang out and he felt as though he had been struck by an ancient giant's hammer. Russell could hear the ringing of bells and drums in his ears. It was as though an electric current had passed through his body. Even his bones emitted caw-caw sounds. The steel longsword in his hand had been broken. A perfectly good sword, after being hacked down by the other party, had been reduced into the shape of a folding ruler. What great strength! Russell's palm was in great pain. The web between his thumb and index finger had cracked, and even his wrist was injured. He stumbled back a few steps, unable to stand steadily. The other party laughed disdainfully. "So, that's all you have." After saying that, he put away his sword and used the hilt of the sword to point at Russell's chest. Although it was only the hilt of the sword, Russell was certain that his sternum would be shattered by the other party's strength. His heart was filled with shock as he desperately moved back to dodge. After all, his martial arts skills were not bad. After dodging a few times, the other party's attacks had all missed. He could not help but snort and say in a low muffled voice, "You are quite nimble." However, just blindly dodging will not hurt the enemy. Could it be that you are hoping to exhaust the enemy to death by dodging like this? Those words caused Russell's face to turn red. Seeing that his subordinates had all been captured, he made up his mind. He bent down and pulled out a dagger from his boot. Suddenly, he rolled on the ground and pressed himself against the other party. Seeing the other party's heavy sword hacking down, he did not care any more. He only had the intention to go all out. Even if he were to be hacked to death by the other party, he would still stab this fellow. That person suddenly laughed loudly. "You still have some backbone." After saying that, without seeing the other party's actions, Russell felt his head collide with a hard iron wall. When he raised his head to look, he suddenly felt pain in his palm. The other party's heavy sword had used the side of the blade to heavily slap the back of his hand. Although the other party had held back his strength, this slap had almost broken Russell's hand. Following that, a large force came crashing over and Russell flew backward. After he landed, 3 or 4 mounted bandits pounced on him and directly tied him up with rope. Russell sighed in his heart. Forget it. Accept your fate. However, he was shocked in his heart. He knew the names of most of the mounted bandits on the wildfire steppe. Although there were a few strong fellows, he had never heard of such a powerful existence. The person in front of him had easily taken him down in 2 or 3 moves. It was as if the other party had not even used his full strength. With this kind of ability, not to mention the mounted bandits on the wildfire steppes, there were probably only a few in the entire Byzantine Empire. Thinking of this, Russell hardened his heart and cursed loudly. "All right, you win. Lao Tzu admits defeat. However, this time you were ordered by those Cossacks. Do you really think those Cossacks have good intentions? Those carriages belong to the Gallant's Chamber of Commerce. You should know what kind of trouble you'll cause by robbing something from the Gallant's Chamber of Commerce. Also, that person is a member of the Rhodian Cavalry Regiment. If you dare to do this, you'll just have to wait for the revenge of the Rhodian Cavalry Regiment." After saying that, Russell closed his eyes and waited for death. After he finished speaking, the expected butcher's knife didn't fall. After a moment of silence, the other party's majestic expert suddenly looked up to the sky and laughed loudly. A muffled voice came from under the mask. "What nonsense are you talking about? What Cossack mounted bandits? What Gallant's Chamber of Commerce? It's been so many years. Are those Cossacks still doing shady business? TSK. Trash is trash." After saying that, the man slowly walked in front of Russell. He lifted his leg and kicked Russell to the ground. Under the iron mask, his eyes were like lightning as he stared at Russell. He sneered and said, "From what you've said, it seems that one of your people has been robbed by the Cossacks? Ha, someone from the army? Rhodian Cavalry Regiment? With these sloppy fellows under your command, you dare to call yourself a member of the Rhodian Cavalry Regiment? Don't think that I don't know you. You're Russell. I've heard of your name since a long time ago." Russell made a sound of surprise and stared with his eyes wide open. "You've heard of my name? You? You're not a member of the Cossacks? I'm not. The other party shook his head and seemed to smile. You're lucky. If you met us a few days ago, we would have cut you down with a sword. However, I've already sworn not to be a mounted bandit. We were just resting in this forest when you guys barged in. You, Russell, have quite a reputation. How can you be so useless? You didn't even send people to search the forest? You. Who the hell are you? Russell hastily asked. Since you're not a member of the Cossacks, please let me go. I admit defeat. Since I've fallen into your hands, I'll just pay the ransom. However, there are still people outside waiting for us to save them. If we are unable to return, I'm afraid that Sir Shea and the others will be in danger. Hearing that, the other party gave a disdainful laugh. I don't care about your matters. Letting you go is not impossible. Wait until tomorrow morning when we set off. Before we leave, I will let you go. As for tonight, you can just stay here obediently. The other party appeared indifferent. After saying that, however, his eyes suddenly flickered. A fiery light burst out from his eyes, and he abruptly roared out. With one hand, he grabbed Russell and pulled him up. What did you say just now? What Sir Shea? Say it again. Which Sir Shea is it? Being grabbed by the neck, Russell found it difficult to breathe. His face flushed red as he struggled for a while. Only then did the other party's fingers loosen slightly. His voice was filled with anxiety and anger. Speak clearly. The Cossacks wanted to kill the Cossacks. The one they want to deal with is Shea? Hurry up and tell me. What is going on? Where is he? Helpless, Russell could only grit his teeth and give a rough account of what happened. The other party appeared very agitated and asked a few more questions about the appearance of this Sir Shea. Russell told him the truth. Even the appearances of Shea's subordinates, Todoro, Sharba and Philip, were not missing a single detail. After hearing that, the other party appeared stunned for a moment. Then, he abruptly tossed Russell aside. The muscular fellow raised his head to the sky and cursed. Son of a bitch! Son of a bitch! Cossacks, those son of a bitch! They actually dared to make a move on Shea. This old lady will chop them up. Old lady? Hearing the other party call himself that, Russell nearly fainted. This expert was enraged. His anger was like a thunderbolt. He shouted, Everyone get on your horses. Show your swords. Follow this old lady to chop them up. Many of his subordinates responded loudly and whistled. Suddenly, another 100 or so riders rushed out from the forest. Such a scene made Luo Su extremely astonished. The other party had a total of over 200 riders hiding in the forest without making a single move. Even the elite cavalry of the Byzantine Empire would not be able to do such a thing. Seeing the other party's riders coming out, every single one of their horses had their mouths covered. They were probably trying to hide their tracks in the forest. No wonder when his men entered the forest, they did not hear anything as Russell was letting his imagination run wild. He was suddenly grabbed by the expert again. Like a chicken, he was thrown onto the back of a horse. You! Lead the way. Go chop those Cossacks. Go save Sir Shea. Although Russell's mind was in a mess, he was still able to understand the words. He could not help but feel overjoyed. Riding on the horse, he could not help but ask in surprise. Ah! You, may I ask who you are? Me! The other party smiled proudly and mounted the horse. She puffed out her chest. This old lady is Sir Shea's fiancée, his future wife. Plop! Russell fell off the horse again. The other party was clearly very angry. She grabbed him again and threw him onto the back of the horse. She shouted, How can you be so useless? Sit properly. If you fall again, I will chop you up. After saying that, she waved her hand. Brothers, get into formation. Follow me to chop them up. Those Cossacks bastards want to harm my husband. What do you think we should do? Her subordinates roared in response. Chop their mother. Good. Let's chop their mother. Chop those Cossacks bastards. Chop their mother. Over 200 shining cavalry swords were raised. Instantly, a scene of snow-white light appeared. Riding on the horse, Russell's heart calmed down. However, he felt that in all the things he had experienced in his life, nothing could compare to what he was experiencing today. The dazzling light from the over 200 cavalry swords made him dizzy. He could not help but sneak a glance at this Sir Shea's wife. Suddenly, a trace of pity appeared in Russell's heart. Sigh, Sir Shea is also a pitiful person. Waves of shouts of "chop their mother" rang out as the 200 cavalry charged forward like a hurricane, requesting votes. I want a recommendation ticket. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. Support the author, support the original reading. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.